All right, new episode of Jung Naiv. I have a new guest. Who are you?
I'm Gary Stevenson.
What do you do, Gary?
I'm a British inequality economist, former trader. 2011, I was CitiBank's top trader in the world. I'm the author of this book, Das Milliardenspiel, which tells that story, and now I campaign for high tax on the rich.
You wrote a German book?
In English, it's called The Trading Game, but we've got a German translation. It's just here on the table with my beautiful face on it.
What is an inequality economist? I've never heard that term.
So I guess you could say I'm a classically trained economist. Mm-hmm. I did maths and economics at LSE, the London School of Economics, 2005, 2008. I did econ at Oxford, masters, 17 to 19. But I also worked as a trader from 2008 to 2014. And during that period, I became convinced that we had, and still have, an economic crisis of growing wealth inequality. I started to trade based on that, and I was very successful. Mm-hmm. And since 2014, when I quit trading, I remain convinced that living standards will get worse and worse and worse because of growing wealth inequality. And I'm trying to find ways to convince people that we have to stop inequality from growing.
So inequality economy doesn't mean you're pro-inequality. We got that right.
I think we need less than we've got, and we're not going in that direction.
Why?
The main thing is, when inequality gets very high, then you have a class of very rich people who generate enormous amounts of income. And they use that income to buy the assets of the middle class. They use that income to buy the assets of the government. And you get into a dynamic where wealth kind of gets sucked out of the middle class and sucked out of governments. I think you're really seeing that, especially in the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years. And then increasingly, the middle class has no power to spend, and that drives wages down, that drives living standards down. But at the same time, because rich people are accumulating more and more assets, they have increasingly more and more income, which they can further use to buy the rest of the assets, which drives asset prices up and creates this kind of spiral of increasing inequality of wealth, which ultimately destroys the middle class. And I think I've been betting on this for 15 years now, and I think it's become increasingly obvious that this is happening.
And why is that bad?
Well, if you go and look at countries that don't have a middle class, or that have a very small middle class, to be honest, that's the norm in most of the world. It's the norm in most of history. But we have had, here in Western Europe, for the last 70 years, we've had quite an unusual situation historically, which is we've had a relatively large property-owning middle class. And during that period of time, people like my dad didn't go to university. He worked for the post office for 30 years. They were able to buy houses, go on holidays, support families. That is what is possible when you have a large property-owning middle class, like we had in England for a long time, like you've had in Germany for a long time, like we've had in the States for a long time. Go and look at countries that don't have large property-owning middle classes, which is, you could look at tons of countries, India, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, most of the world, to be honest.
So like having a middle class is like basically the exception to the rule globally?
It's the exception to the rule, yeah. But in those countries, you have high living standards. It's as simple as that, basically. And, it's not just that Europe has always had high living standards. If you go back 100 years, when we had much, much higher inequality, living standards were phenomenally bad in the UK. I'm not an expert on the history of Germany, but 100 years ago, there were problems here as well.
What do we mean by middle class?
Well, it's a very contested term. When I say middle class...
let's start with the basics for the audience.
Different people use this term in different ways. When I use this term, I'm talking about a family that basically has some chunk of property ownership. They own their own home without an enormous mortgage. Maybe they have some share of the stock market. Basically, these guys have got a good chunk of wealth ownership, basically. That's what I talk about when I say middle class. Do people own a significant amount of wealth?
So like myself, like I don't own anything. Like I don't own my home. I only rent an apartment.
Yeah.
I'm not middle class.
Well, if you have a big sort of stock portfolio, then you could be probably considered middle class.
Don't have that either.
Well, then in that case, I would say you're probably, to be honest, increasingly the norm for modern young people. I know your colleague told me you're similar age to myself. I know we're not super young anymore, but one of the big things that got me thinking about this, so I was a trader and I started working in 2008, just before the financial crisis. And everybody knows about the financial crisis. Everybody knows that interest rates went to zero. So my job was I was an interest rates trader. So our job was to basically predict the future path of interest rates. So obviously in 2008, rates went to zero. But then what people often don't know is that at that point in time, everybody thought, because of these phenomenally low levels of interest rates, the low interest rates would stimulate the economy and we'd get a powerful economic recovery. And financial markets and economists in 2008 said rates would go back up in 2009. In 2009, they said 2010. In 2010, they said 2011. And they actually predicted a renormalization of interest rates every single year up until 2020. And in 2020, they finally said rates would stay zero forever, just before rates came back up. So we can see that these predictions were bad. But my job was to make these predictions, right? So in about 2011, I've been sitting watching economists say we're going to get a recovery for about 3 years and be wrong every time. And the reason that the recovery didn't happen is because zero interest rates were supposed to get people spending and people weren't spending. So, that whole period, this 10 years basically, 13, 14 years after 2008, is in an economy where people aren't spending. And nobody really understood why spending was so weak in that period, because you've got these zero interest rates, quantitative easing, massive deficits. All of these things are supposed to get people spending. So I come from quite a poor background. My friends, my family are all from poor, ordinary backgrounds. I just went out and asked people, why don't you spend? If you've never done that, I think that's a really useful and interesting and important thing to do.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, just because there's like low interest rates or zero interest rates doesn't mean that I have money in my bank account.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point you make. And you should make that to more economists, because economists believe in perhaps quite a simplistic way that zero interest rates are economically stimulative. They get people spending. That's what they believe. And I think now we can look back to that period after 2008 and we can see that it didn't really stimulate the economy.
So the economists, they skip the step where the money gets into my bank account so I can spend it.
Well, this is what I was really thinking about a lot in the years after 2008. Because I studied economics, right, at the London School of Economics, which is a very fancy economic school. And we're taught zero interest rates boost the economy, it gets people spending. But when I went out and asked people, because by the beginning of 2011, I've witnessed sort of 3 years of everybody being consistently wrong on this. And I'm starting to doubt whether the theory is right. So I started asking people, why don't you spend more money? And they all say, exactly as you suggested, we don't have any more money. That's why we don't spend, right? But I started to dig into their financial situation because, you don't want to just take people at their word, right? I've studied 3 years at this prestigious university. They should be spending. They say we don't have any more money. But when you look into the financial situation of people my age, and this is back sort of 13 years ago, what I saw was a generation of people whose parents own property, but they themselves will never own property. So what that means is the middle class is going over time from being a property-owning middle class to being a middle class that does not own property. And in the UK, that's how you accumulate wealth. So that means the middle class is losing its wealth. This means their wealth trajectory is downwards over time, right? And it doesn't make sense to go to a family that is overspending their income, running their wealth down over time, and say to them, why don't you spend more money? Because they obviously can't spend more money in the long term, right? And this is what I was sitting and thinking about early 2011. I was thinking, how can it be that like everybody is dissaving their wealth? How can it be that everyone is dissaving their wealth? And at the time, the economic narrative at the time, interestingly, quite similar to the economic narrative now, actually, which is, well, if people can't spend, government should step in. Government should step in and spend. And that was kind of what I was thinking about, what people were thinking about early 2011. Then I got called into a meeting with one of the senior economists at CitiBank, who was actually quite a good economist. I'm quite critical of economists, but he was quite good. And this is early 2011, right? And he goes through the financial situation of all of the world's major governments. So obviously Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, but also the UK, the US, Japan. And in every case, what you saw was governments overspending their income, running into debt, dissaving their assets, running their asset situation down. So I came out of this meeting, I couldn't help but notice this kind of symmetry between the position of my friends' families and national governments, which is in both cases spending more than your income, accumulating debt, running down your assets. And what really struck me about this was the impossibility of it. It's not possible for everybody to lose their assets. You know, the houses have not been destroyed. You know, the businesses have not been destroyed. These are physical assets that still exist. Somebody has to own them. How can everybody be losing them?
Yeah, who are they losing it to?
Well, and it's also not possible for everybody to accumulate debt at the same time.
Exactly.
Somebody has to be accumulating credit. And I sort of sat back on my desk, and I was a very young trader. I was still only 24, I think. And my job used to be to take the sandwiches to this meeting. So I had all these sandwiches around me. And I was thinking, who's accumulating...
Sandwiches?
Sandwiches. You know, you don't have them here? Sandwiches?
Yeah, like you eat them.
Yeah.
All right.
I was very young, so I was at this meeting. I had to take the sandwiches to the meeting. Brought the sandwiches back, sat them down. I was trying to think, who's got the money? Who's got the money? Who's got the assets? Where is it going?
Yeah.
of course, you know, I'm working CitiBank trading floor, surrounded by millionaires, you know. And I think the previous year I'd made nearly £500,000 myself at the age of 23. And I thought, it's us, isn't it? This is what's happening. This is not happening in isolation. The loss of wealth of the middle class and the loss of wealth of the government is the accumulation of wealth of the rich.
You looked in the mirror.
Yeah, and then what you realise straight away is, well, if my friends' families can't run a balanced budget when they own their own house, what happens to the next generation when they don't own their own house? And if global Western governments can't run a balanced budget when they're not massively in debt, well, what happens when they are massively in debt? And you realise that this will get worse. This will get worse because if the middle class is already losing and they've got assets, well, they're going to lose worse when they haven't got assets. And if the rich is already winning when they've got less assets, their asset situation is growing, this is going to spiral and get worse and worse. So I put a massive bet on that rates would stay zero for a long, long time, which it's easy in hindsight to say that was obvious. Nobody thought that at the time. All of the financial markets were saying massive recovery. At the time, I think markets and economists thought we'd have 6 hikes in the next year from the US, which ended up being 0. So I put a massive bet on that there would never be a recovery. And that was the bet that made me a millionaire and made me CitiBank's top trader in 2011. So your situation as somebody who, you know, we've only just met, but you seem a very intelligent chap, hardworking, I'm sure.
I pretend to be.
But has not accumulated any assets. That is kind of the perfect picture of the new economy. You know, as my dad never went to university, he was earning less than average income his whole life. He was able to buy a house on that. It's this loss of assets of the middle class, which I think is really the driving change in our economy. And I think it's super relevant now in the aftermath of COVID, because COVID saw an enormous acceleration in growth of wealth inequality.
Right.
And so the story of me as a trader at CitiBank is in this book. But in 2014, I quit. And I was convinced, and I still am convinced, that this will get worse and worse and worse. And I bet on it year after year, and I make money year after year. I quit in 2014. I've spent the last 10 years trying to figure out, like, how the hell do you stop this? I think it's important to make clear, most economists don't think this. They don't think that we're in a permanent worsening crisis of inequality, which...
They're bad economists then.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, that's why financial forecasting has been so consistently wrong for a long period of time. Because what you have here is a fundamental problem that is growing in an accelerating way. Economists who are classically trained nowadays at elite universities have learned a type of economics which has no inequality in it. That might sound shocking to you, but that is what is taught nowadays at universities. We study very complicated mathematical models but they're what they call representative agent models, which is we just look at one person and imagine that one person is the whole economy, which means there's no inequality. We're looking at aggregates. We're looking at averages.
There's no society, right?
Well, there is, but it's just one big guy. So there's no inequality. You cannot put inequality in those models. There's no inequality in it. So most economists don't think of the economy in terms of distribution. And in my opinion, what we have now is a really serious, continually worsening crisis of growing inequality. And yet, the vast majority of economists don't believe inequality is a significant economic thing, never mind the problem. This is like you're dying of cancer in a world where no doctor believes in cancer. That's the situation that we're in at the moment. And
although there have been doctors in the past who recognize that there's this thing like cancer, and nowadays the doctors forgot about that.
Well,
right?
It's almost hard for me to answer that because, like I say, I'm a classically trained economist.
I read some books.
Yeah.
Of former economists.
Yeah, I've heard. I couldn't tell you names. There were guys
Keynes,
in the past.
Marx and all these. Like they've heard of inequality before.
There were people in the past that liked to talk about inequality. It has become very much like a side quest in economics. If you want to be successful in economics nowadays, don't do inequality work. And if you do inequality work, you have to do this weird kind of wonky hypermath inequality work that doesn't really answer the problem.
But if most of economists, I mean, we've had many on, and I agree, like they don't care about inequality, or like they don't want to talk about it. Doesn't that essentially mean that they work in service of the rich? Because if there's one group who doesn't want to talk about inequality because it would make them less rich, it's them.
It's an interesting question to ask. What is it that economists do?
I mean, they consider themselves scientists.
Yeah.
But they work unscientifically.
I think,
right?
Can I tell you a quick story that I think gives a good bit of information as to what an economist is nowadays?
Yeah.
All right, so I was a trader for CitiBank 2008, 2014.
You mentioned that.
Traded interest rates. I made a lot of money betting that interest rates wouldn't stay zero when everybody thought they would.
You mentioned that.
2017, I went back to do a master's at Oxford. And interest rates are like a really fundamental part of what economists think about nowadays. They're kind of obsessed with them. So we have a lecture on interest rates. And I'm obviously very interested in interest rates. So I stayed behind to talk to the professor. And I said to him, why do you think we have been so wrong on interest rates for so long? Why did we spend 10 years saying they're about to go up and they didn't go up? And he said to me, no, you're wrong. We always knew that rates would stay zero for a long time, which is just categorically provably wrong because you can go back and you can look at the forecasts, you can look at the market prices. And I was quite shocked, right? Because he's an Oxford professor teaching interest rates, was not aware that the whole discipline spent 10 years mispredicting interest rates.
A lousy professor.
But the thing is, he was the best professor there. But that is the state of play nowadays. These guys...
He ignored the history?
It's not that he ignored the history.
The facts?
These guys aren't paid to understand what's happening. They're paid to write these kind of super complex mathematical models. There's this phrase in academic, publish or perish. Have you heard this?
Yeah.
So you have to be constantly writing papers. And
right.
if you're not writing papers, then you're not going to get promoted, basically. And this guy's at Oxford, so he's obviously very successful. It's not that he's been wrong. He has no interest in whether their predictions are right or not. He's not incentivized to make good predictions. He's not punished for making bad predictions. His whole job is to write these crazy mathematical papers. And it's so interesting for me because there's this other world of economists that you will never get them on this channel, right? These guys are paid €2 million a year to make correct forecasts. And these guys are traders. And the best paid 10,000 economists in the world are all traders. And they can't speak publicly. It's part of their contract. They can't come on this channel. And consider yourself a young economist. You've just graduated from the London School of Economics. You've got a great degree. You're 20 years old. You have to choose what to do. You can stay in academia, which is what you need to do if you want to work in politics or become an academic economist. And you're going to have to do a master's and a PhD and a postdoc, and you're going to have to get funding for 15 years of study, and you might make some money when you're 40. Or you can go into finance. I was a multimillionaire at 25. So I think this is the context you need to understand about economics here, which is what kind of person is going to choose to stay in academia? It basically somebody who's from a rich family or is a bit crazy, really, because there's an enormous financial incentive to bring these guys into trading. And it's so interesting that on the trading floor, you have all of these guys just try and be right, try and be right, try and be right, try and be right. You know, then I came out and I go to Oxford and it's like, okay, I've been right at this thing you've been wrong at for 10 years. Are you interested? No, of course they're not interested because they're not paid to be right. And, you know, in the last 4 years now, I've been working in media. I put a video out. My first article I ever wrote was March 2020, beginning of COVID. And the article said, the way we're dealing with COVID is going to lead to an enormous increase in inequality. That's going to cause a cost of living crisis, an inflation crisis, a house price crisis, an enormous increase in the gold price and the stock price. I'm not just making this up. You can go, you can watch the first video on my YouTube, you can read my first article.
Thankfully, you were wrong.
Yeah. But I don't get any reward for writing articles that are right, in hindsight. And, you know, when I worked in the city, I got paid, you know, in my best year, I got paid over $2 million for making correct predictions. Whereas I've been spending 5 years trying to talk to politicians for free and they won't listen. This is the world of economics we've built. If you have somebody who's young, from a poor background, very good predictor, he can get paid £2 million a year to work for a bank. He's not really recognised at all in the world of economics because economics doesn't value making good predictions. And then that raises a question of, well, what is an economist then?
Exactly.
Because we can't do experiments. There's no value given to correct prediction. It kind of becomes, if I'm being honest, it's a kind of about who you know. You have to be able to do a certain kind of maths, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I walked into CitiBank. When I was 24, I was famous. I was the top trader there because I was making good predictions. I've been out here for 4 or 5 years now. Nobody really listened to me until, you know, Penguin published a book, you know, until you're trying to sell something.
I mean, I asked the science question because, like, Steve Keen was on recently, and he said economics is not a science at all. And you kind of are confirming it by what you're saying.
There's no experiments. For me...
I mean, Steve said like this, I wrote down, like, economists, mainstream economists at least, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but mainstream economists don't say what is or was, they only tell you what ought to be. Like what their numbers tell them how the reality should be.
I mean, there's all different kinds of economists out there. The reality of the situation is most economists in academia are just trying to write the kind of papers that will get them promoted. That's all they're doing. Exactly. Which means they're basically doing a kind of obscure branch of mathematics.
Right.
And they're like this guy that has basically no interest in whether his prediction... They are...
And their math tells them what ought to be.
That's wrong, right?
Okay.
They don't care what ought to be. The vast majority of economists have absolutely no interest in the real economy. They are, especially the successful ones, they exist. Like, I did a 2-year master at Oxford, right? 2017 to 2019. It's Oxford, right? So everybody there is like number one at their undergrad university, right? So like super, super smart kids. And what do they do when they're there? You know, these are like, I think there were 77 kids on the course. 77 super, super smart 22, 23, 24-year-olds. They spent 2 years locked in libraries doing simultaneous equations and inverting matrices. That's what they did.
Exciting.
It should be obvious that does not help them understand the economy. But that is what economics at university is nowadays. And there's this thing that happens when you spend 10 years of your life doing extremely complicated maths, you need to believe you're understanding something. But all they're actually trying to do is do this maths. It's become, you know, I heard this story, and I'm not an expert on Chinese history, but I heard that back in like medieval China, if you wanted to, the best job you could get was to be like a top bureaucrat in the Chinese government.
All right.
And to get that job, you needed to learn how to write perfectly like 10,000 Chinese characters. Mm-hmm. That's what you needed to do. And this basically was a job that, this basically means unless you're super, super dedicated and super hardworking and realistically come from a family that's rich enough to put you through 10 years of education, you can't become a top bureaucrat in Chinese democracy, in Chinese government. That is economics nowadays. It's just become this system where unless you are willing to spend 10 years locked in a library doing simultaneous equations, you're not allowed to talk about economics. That's basically what it is. And
so basically, if I've been locked into a library for 10 years, studied this shit, I have to convince myself that this makes sense.
They need to believe they're doing something.
Exactly. So
they need to believe. But look at this.
Otherwise, like my whole world crumbles because, like, what the fuck have I been doing for 10 years?
Yeah, they need to believe it. But look, anyone who goes to work, if you go to work as a trader, everyone who goes to work as a trader immediately abandons everything they learned at university because they know it's useless. It has no predictive power. They can't really use it at all. And these guys get paid. You know, you're a journalist. You want to know what's going to happen to European interest rates. I traded European interest rates for CitiBank, right? And I was getting paid $2 million a year. If you call up CitiBank as a journalist, hi, you know, I work for Jung Naiv. I want to speak to what's going to happen to European interest rates. Mm-hmm. Do you think they put you on the phone to me?
Probably not.
They put you on the phone to somebody earning 50,000 euros a year. Mm-hmm. You know, literally talking 3% of what I earn, who's never spoken to me in their life. They make sure that people like me, who have a good track record of predicting, manage the money, and somebody else who gets paid a tiny fraction of what I get paid talks about it. We've really successfully separated the two worlds of economics. A world of people who are aggressively incentivized to be right, but are not allowed to speak about it, and a world of people who have absolutely no incentivization to be right at all, but are allowed to have a voice.
So there are useful economists, but they work for basically the rich, those who are traders.
Yeah.
And then there are the economists who are like at universities or like work at government or so like they don't care, as you said, if they're right or wrong.
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that every economist who works for government or who works in academia is bad. The problem, because that's not true. The problem you have here is
most of them.
If you're a really good economist and you go to work in finance as a trader, mm-hmm. you know, you can become very, very well known and very, very well paid very, very quickly because you're making good predictions no one else can make. That is totally not valued in academia. It's totally not valued in government. It's totally not valued in journalism. So, you know, I can become super well known on the trading floor because I'm right every year. Mm-hmm. I walk into Oxford and say, hey, I've been right for 10 years in a row. This kind of information would get me £2 million a year for JP Morgan, for Goldman Sachs, you know, for Credit Suisse, for Deutsche Bank.
All right.
Academia, no interest. We don't care if you're right. So the problem you have then is academic economics is an extremely competitive field. So everyone else who's in there is very aggressively trying to do this crazy, like, 10-dimensional mathematics. Mm-hmm. If you go in there and you're like, well, I'm going to understand the economy and I'm going to say something valuable about the economy, you are going to get outcompeted by guys who spend 100 hours a week locked in a library. Right. So it's not that there are no good people in public economics. It's that it's impossible for people in public economics who actually want to understand and do good to make themselves visible and reach the top of the field.
I mean, there's no doubt there are always good people in every field, and I don't want to come off like that, but we're criticizing the academic field in general. And
the people at the top, I mean, there are, you know, you have, Thomas Piketty, the famous French economist.
Yes.
And he basically had to work himself up not doing inequality stuff. He had to spend years and years establishing himself as an academic before he was actually able to be like, well, actually, and he knows inequality is destroying the economy, and he has to think about how can I talk about this, because this is just not what we speak about. And he's ended up, in a sense, in a weird way, doing a similar thing to what I'm doing, which is trying to communicate to the public, in a way. Because academia is a lot less interested in Piketty since he's moved into inequality work.
Right. I mean, as you said, like academia, like for them, for most professors, it's all about being published or being like in the media or something. And then there are those who go into trading. And when you say like, they basically told you, forget about everything you learned.
Yeah.
I mean, why not just abolish economics? At university.
To be honest, when I was at Oxford, the thought went through my mind. I was thinking, if the world would be a better place if this.
What's the point?
Because I mean, the truth is,
you don't need it for trading, obviously.
It ends up being a bunch of posh guys talking a bunch of nonsense, and they are occupying the space that should be occupied by people who are saying, "There's a problem, let's fix it." I was very critical of the professors at university, and I had one of my mid-year reviews or whatever, and I went in and, you're in this wood-panelled hall and you have to wear a cape and a bow tie. You've got these professors in front of you. And they said, what do you think of the course? And I said, I think it's shit.
Of what?
Of the course.
Of the course.
Of the course. I said, I think it's shit. And they were kind of taken aback and they said, why? And I said to them, why don't you talk about the housing crisis? Why don't you talk about, why people...
Climate change.
Well, I didn't say that. They would have just kicked me out probably. But they turned around to me and they said, well, the housing crisis is only in London.
Oh.
And I said to them, okay, well, that's because all the jobs are in London.
Oh.
And this guy said to me, that's not true. I've got a job in Oxford. He's a macroeconomics professor at Oxford. So can you imagine telling that to somebody unemployed, in the north of England or some rural provincial town in Germany? Oh, maybe you can go become a macroeconomics professor at Oxford. These guys...
Doesn't that guy teach macro? Doesn't he know the difference?
They don't care. They don't care? Once they get there, they're well paid. They've got no interest.
Well, if they don't care, let's just abolish that shit.
I mean, I'm open to it. I think I would like to see economists forced to make predictions. I would like to see them forced to make predictions because I would like to see them come out and compete with me, and I would like to be able to compete with them. And I would like to be able to say, look, I live in a world where I make hundreds of thousands of pounds every year by betting that our society will collapse. And I would like to be able to go to the economist and say, look, society is collapsing, and have them listen. But I'm not allowed to bet against them. I'm not allowed to compete with them. I'm not allowed to say, look, make your predictions and I'm going to predict against you and I'm going to show that you're wrong and I'm right.
Like I support that because we all would want and we would need the best economists out there in Germany, Britain, all over the world.
Yeah.
And we would get them by letting them all make predictions, and those who are wrong are sorted out. Those who are right get to the next round or,
it's funny,
or go on.
They love the free market, they love
so
competition,
on.
but they don't want to be competed themselves.
Exactly.
They refuse to be competed themselves, and it's I put at the end of my book, I would like to thank God or whoever it was. He made it so easy to bet on terrible things happening and so difficult to stop them. Because if it wasn't for you, I'd probably be on a beach somewhere getting sunburnt and bored out of my skull. But this is the world that we live in. I would be £10 million richer if I wasn't here. If I stayed on the trading floor. That would be the truth. And I would be £10 million richer by having bet year after year after year that our societies and our economies will collapse. And we live in a world that will pay me £1 million, £2 million a year to bet on the collapse of society and pay me precisely nothing to try and stop the collapse of society. That is the world that we live in.
We live in a world where the preachers of competition are afraid of competition.
I wish,
Not you.
Yeah.
But most economists.
Yeah, I wish they would come out and, predict against me.
Yeah.
Because the stuff that I predict is, you can go and look at my predictions at the beginning of COVID, It's not a coincidence that those predictions were right, just like my predictions in 2011 were right, because I'm good at this. You don't get to be a multi-millionaire when you look like me and talk like me unless you're fucking good at this. But the traders in the trading world will listen, but the economists in the public sphere basically have no interest.
I mean, we will talk about how you became as good as you say, but let's stick to economics for a second. Mm-hmm. Let's say I want to become an economist.
Okay.
I don't want to become a trader.
Yeah.
I hate those people.
Yeah. Dickheads.
I don't want to become a professor.
Okay.
Let's say I want to do something good for the society,
Okay.
for the world.
Yeah.
I want to make the world a better place as an economist.
Yeah.
What do I do?
So you're saying in this hypothetical situation.
Can I go to Oxford and learn that? No.
The thing is, unless you go to a prestigious university, you will be shut out of a lot of conversations, and your voice will not be given space or respected in a lot of situations.
I can have a YouTube channel, go on Twitter.
Yeah, you can, but it's difficult to grow a YouTube channel. I've managed to do it myself, but it's a very elitist space. Mm-hmm. Even now, right? I've got 1 degree from LSE, 1 from Oxford, and I'm a multi-millionaire who made it from betting on the economy. And I was one of the top traders in the world, one of the biggest banks in the world. Every video I put out, there's a couple of guys at the bottom. Who the fuck is this guy? He's not an economist. And that's just because of how I look and because of how I sound. That's just the way that it works. It's an extremely elitist space. So I think if you want people in power to listen to your voice, you probably do have to get yourself a degree from one of those elite universities. But the problem then is, it's undergrad 3 years, locked in library, doing simultaneous equations. Postgrad, another 5 or 6 years, 7, 8 maybe, locked in library, doing simultaneous equations. I think the question is, can you get through those 10 years and have your soul survive? And I think very, very few people can. Being locked in a library for 10 years doing simultaneous equations, it can mess a guy up, and I've seen it mess good people up.
No, fuck those equations. I want to make the world a better place. And I want to use the tool of economics.
Well, I've made my decision.
Mm-hmm. After you became rich.
Well, it's the only way.
It's a privilege.
Yeah.
Most people are not privileged.
It's a necessity, really, because, I had to run my YouTube channel. I had to pay for it myself, never mind being paid. For like 3 or 4 years, the YouTube channel. So, it's a question about activism in general. How can you afford to do meaningful activism when you can't pay the bills? It's difficult. But what I would say to a young person who wants to study economics, I get asked this all the time. People ask me, should I go into trading? But the truth is, if I didn't go into trading, who buys me a house? Who buys my brother a house? Who buys my sister a house? You know what I mean? These are difficult decisions for young people to make. And, it's no coincidence I'm the only ex-trader out here, because once you're in a situation where you can make €1 million, €2 million a year, you're probably not going to walk away from it. And I think this in a sense is another consequence of inequality. If you create this group of people who are extraordinarily rich and you dispossess the middle class, you dispossess the government, the rich can outcompete ordinary people for access to the best economists. And they'll pay me millions of pounds a year to work for them. You know what I mean? It happens in every field.
How about, just an idea, we found, let's call it a national trading company, where you as a trader work for the society and you do your betting, your successful betting in service of the society, and you make us all money.
Am I going to get...
You don't enrich yourself or your fucking bank.
Yeah.
You enrich the society, and we can pay the NHS, we help out the poor, all that, with your skills of trading. How about that?
First of all, it's a lot of pressure on me. I do still trade myself.
No, but you get the idea.
I think it would be nice. It would be nice in concept if the government could afford the best economists. But I don't think this is...
But as you said, you don't need your economics for trading.
Yeah. You don't need my economics for trading, did you say?
Yeah, you said when you went into trading, they told you forget about economics.
I don't need the economics I learned at university. But, I had to develop an understanding of the economy myself. And that economics I do use. I don't think... Economics matters. It's just that the economics at university has become totally useless.
Right.
An understanding of the economy is vitally, crucially important. That's everything that I do is try to improve people's understanding.
Exactly. But trading is highly profitable. So let's just make it profitable for society and not private person.
But you can't afford the traders. You're basically saying, let's turn government into an investment bank.
That's an idea. Like if we want to keep the system as it is,
look,
let's do that.
I'm not an expert on the German government, right? But in the UK, we are basically closing down the welfare state. We're shutting down the National Health Service. We're shutting down effectively the police. We're shutting down local youth services. Increasingly, there's very little, if any, support for the poor. I don't think in that situation our best bet is to try and turn government into an investment bank.
It was a joke.
Yeah.
Because like our system, the German system, the European system, the British system, they don't want to do anything about wealth inequality, about serving the poor.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, let's just use the traders.
People suggest this to me sometimes, but the thing is, you're not going to beat the rich at their own game. They're rich, you're poor. This is the world we live in, okay? Increasingly, the rich are extremely rich, and they have the money they need to dominate a lot of spheres of power. They influence politics, they influence the media massively. The only power that we have as ordinary people, which is the only power that...
You're not ordinary, you're part of the rich.
Well, tell that to me at 15 when I was doing my homework on the floor on a wooden board, you know what I mean? Delivering newspapers in the morning. I know what it's like to be poor. I've been poor. The only power we've ever had is that there's more of us. And I think what I do now is I try to persuade people that they need to act politically. And when I say politically, I don't mean necessarily that means voting for this party or that party. For me, political power is being willing to work together to protect your interests, to protect your wealth, to protect your financial position. I think that's the only chance the poor have against this increasingly extremely wealthy rich.
I mean, there's been a party leader. I'm sure, like the party said it themselves in Britain, where the motto was "We are many, they are few."
Yeah, we had one. Yeah, we had one.
And I mean, and if you say you don't beat the rich at their own game, isn't the answer you have to abolish the game?
What do you mean by that?
Well, don't let the rich play their own game.
I mean, what is the game of the rich? There's a couple of games of the rich. For me, the primary game of the rich is outcompeting the middle class for assets.
Exactly.
But the other game of the rich is outcompeting the middle class for control of the media.
Like if there any game in sports or so, and one team always wins.
Yeah.
You either change the game, or
of course you change the game, but how?
This old shit.
How do you change the game? This is the question. How do you change the game?
Exactly.
And
by being the many and not the few.
How do you get?
Democracy.
Look, we just had an election recently in the UK, and this year my book came out and it did quite well. So we've had a lot of growth in the YouTube channel, and I'm getting more and more well known in the UK, and I get access to some politicians and stuff, not publicly, but behind closed doors we can have a chat. And before the election, I was trying to push some of these Labour politicians. Obviously, are you going to do something about inequality? And they say to me, like, it would be nice, but we don't think it's going to be a vote winner.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they said. That's what. Obviously.
Did you ask the Tories or the Labour?
I've never been contacted by a Conservative politician.
Labour politicians tell you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
it's not a winning issue.
I haven't spoken to all of them, but that's the opinion of a lot. And tax was made a massive issue in the election campaign, and the Conservatives were attacking Labour, saying you're going to raise taxes, you're going to raise taxes, you're going to raise taxes. Now, if you ask me, the only way we can ever get those... There's been a massive transfer of assets away from government, away from the middle class, towards the rich. I can't see any way of getting those assets back in the hands of the middle class and the government without raising tax on the rich. And yet, there is a media environment and a political environment where a lot of people, most of whom are not rich or super rich, are aggressively anti-taxation. And for me... that is the battle that we need to win. If we don't win that battle, taxation on the rich will stay low, which will mean the rich will continue to outcompete the middle class for assets, and the middle class will eventually disappear. But it's you have this interesting thing, right? Because the middle class are voting for their own destruction, essentially, in many cases. And I think that, for me, that is the weakness. That is the weakness of this project, because if these people knew what was in store for their kids and their grandkids, which is abject poverty, they wouldn't vote for it. And yet they do vote for it. And it's going to happen. I bet on it happening every year. I make money on that. We need to find ways to explain very clearly to the average German, the average Briton, the average American, if you don't raise tax on the rich, your kids and your grandkids will live in abject poverty. We need to make that crystal clear to them. Because if they knew that, then they would support higher taxation of the rich.
The thing is, it's not rocket science.
Well, then why are people not voting for it? Come on.
You tell me. Maybe there are special interest groups who for decades were very successful in negating that.
Well, this year I've been able to get, I've got the support of a big publisher
because
behind
it's
me.
socialism, you know?
But before this year, I did a lot of radio in the UK. And you would go on and I'm sure you have the same format here, right? You have your left-wing talking head. And because I'm anti-inequality, that's me. And you have your right-wing talking head. And for years, I would go on and say we need to tax the rich more. And I would do that for free. And the person on the other side would be working for one of a number of think tanks, Taxpayers Alliance, IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs. They're paid for by billionaires. So, this is another problem you have with inequality, which is there's not a lot of people whose job it is to go out and talk about economics in the public, in the media. It doesn't cost a lot of money to dominate that narrative. And these guys, they pay people to go out and say, oh, if they try to tax the rich, they're going to end up taxing you. If you tax the rich will leave, the economy will collapse. These guys pump money into these narratives.
And who owns the media? Who publishes those narratives?
Well, most of the media is owned by very wealthy people. Yeah. But the power that we have is what they're saying is not true, and their predictions will be wrong. And I think increasingly it's not really working. When I first started doing this, people would say to me, oh, you can't tax the rich, it's bad for the economy. Nobody says that now. Nobody says that now. Increasingly, people know that the status quo is not working and that it is leading to increasing poverty for ordinary people. I think the problem is, after that, they've got no idea where to turn. They don't know what alternative there is. And if you look at the situation of mainstream political parties across Europe, traditional historical centrist political parties are collapsing. And that is because people are losing faith in the conventional economics of the last 50 years. But what's the alternative? There's a quote, I think it's from, is it Milton Friedman? That says, in a time of crisis, that's a US, very right-wing economist. He said, in a time of crisis, the alternative will be chosen from the ideas lying around at the time. Now, I think a lot of richer people maybe don't realize it. This is increasingly, obviously, a time of crisis for ordinary people across Europe. That's why we're seeing the rise of the far right. That's why we're seeing collapse of traditional political parties. Living standards are collapsing. People can't pay the rent. People can't pay the mortgage. People can't pay their bills. People want something different. We are having a debate now, and the next 5-10 years will be the debate of how do we change our economic system in Germany, in the UK, across the Western world. And the new alternative will be chosen from the ideas lying around at the time. And I'm trying to put this idea on the table, which is the reason living standards are falling is because wealth inequality is rising. If you want to stop living standards falling, you need to stop wealth inequality rising. And that means the rich, especially the very rich, paying much higher taxes. If we don't put that on the table, what's the loudest idea on the table? I think it's pretty obvious at the moment. The loudest, you literally have a party in this country called Alternative for Germany. And it's not just Germany. This is happening across the world. People are laying out their pitch now for what is going to be the new economic settlement. And we need to get reducing inequality on the table, because if reducing inequality is not on the table, then it's going to be reduce immigration. They're going to get in power. They're not going to succeed. And they're going to say the reason we didn't succeed is because we weren't hard enough. We need to be harder on immigrants. We need to be harder on foreigners. And you don't need to be a student of history to see that this has happened before.
You just mentioned the far right and the success of Trump and the far right in Britain, in Germany, in the US, and there's like Steve Bannon, like Trump's advisor, like he framed, or like he made famous the sentence like flooding the public with shit. And this kind of reminds me of what we were just talking about with the lobbyists of the rich that you debate on radio shows and all this. Like, people have been losing faith in journalism. They don't know what's right, what's wrong anymore, due to far right parties flooding the public or the public sphere with shit. Isn't it the same that what the lobbyists have been doing in service of the rich? When it comes to inequality and economics, they've been flooding the public with economic shit, and it's been and people don't know that taxing the rich and fighting inequality is the right thing.
They've got the money to dominate the debate, but we need to. That's the way it is, and we need to find ways to fight that. We need to find ways to fight that. We need to get in the game. We need to get in the game, and we need to find ways to communicate this message to ordinary people, because our alternative is not on the table. We need people to know, if you reduce inequality, your life can be better. And we need to get more. I've been sort of bouncing around the UK for nearly 10 years now, trying to get people behind this message. And I've been increasingly high profile in the last 3 or 4 years. And I've not really been able to get everybody behind this message.
Because you're fighting shit.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but
like we need many more, like you, like others.
Well, I think yes, we do. People often ask me in the UK. We've increasingly we're getting recognised for this message, and inequality and the taxation of the rich is increasingly an argument that has to be had in the media, because we are increasing the salience, the volume of this message in the UK.
Right.
But I don't know, is somebody doing that here? Is somebody doing that in Italy? Is somebody doing that in Spain? Is somebody doing that in France?
I mean, I would expect that journalism and that that economic stuff from at least the public radio, public TV. Like you got the BBC. We have ARD, ZDF here. Because why would privately owned media who are owned by the rich?
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it from them, but I would expect it from public broadcasters, and they are failing the public as well.
Yeah, I think they are failing the public
because they've been lobbied by the rich as well, and the far right and the right.
I do wonder why. Obviously we've got the BBC in the UK, which is it's a fantastic historical public broadcaster. Why do they not talk more about inequality? And I managed years ago, when nobody knew who I was, I managed to get a documentary run on the BBC called "The Decade the Rich Won." And
they would say, and the same goes here. They'd be like, "We've done a documentary, Gary."
Yeah.
There was one documentary last year where there was concern about inequality, but the truth is, when it comes to journalism and the media and influencing the public, is repetition.
Yeah. This is what I mean when I say I want to get everybody on board with this message.
People need to hear about it all the time.
Yeah, you need people saying again and again. Exactly. I mean, that's how the migration argument works. Lots and lots of people say the reason you're poor is because of migration. The reason you're poor is because of migration. And we need, and I've tried my best, but we need more and more people to. You can't. Too many people still think that inequality is an ethical, moral issue. Inequality is a why your kids can't buy a house issue. Mm-hmm. Inequality is a why your kids can't afford a family issue. We need to have more and more people saying this again and again. The reason you and your kids and your grandkids are poor and will increasingly be poor is because of growing inequality. And we need more repetition of that. I'm trying my best. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm here because I want you to be saying that. And I want, I'm getting better known in the UK, but I don't think we're going to win this ourselves. I want Germans and German activists to be saying the same thing, to be saying the same message. The reason you're poor is because of inequality. That's everything I try and do.
It's not the first time that this audience hears about inequality.
Okay,
and
that's good.
And this audience you guys watching can ask Gary anything. Just let Hans know in the chat. He will ask all your questions at the end of this conversation. Let's get back to the middle class.
Okay.
Because you said like there was this middle class, or there still is this middle class that has been owning property.
Yeah.
I mean, same with like my parents. Like they didn't make much money.
Yeah.
In the 90s, but they were still able to like build a house, buy a house, buy a car every 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Nowadays, most kids can't do that anymore. Why were they able to? Why were they a property owning middle class? How were they able to do that?
Because inequality was much lower at that time. We had much higher taxes on the rich, and that prevented the rich from accumulating enormous amounts of money. We reduced our taxation of the rich. Then the rich start accumulating all of this money. And then suddenly you're competing with, a rich person, they can only live in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 houses, but they can own 100. And through mortgage lending, they can own 1,000. Right? You are competing with the rich for ownership of property. If the rich become extremely rich, then house prices will go up. This is the thing. This is the key thing to understand about inequality, right? An ordinary person will spend basically everything they earn in their lifetime, and they'll die with nothing, right? All of my grandparents are dead now, God rest their souls. They all worked their whole lives. None of them left anything, any significant inheritance. They might have left a few £1,000s. They spent everything they earned in their lifetime. Rich people, I often use the example of our recent Prime Minister in the UK, Rishi Sunak, who is allegedly worth £700 million. If you're worth £700 million, you'll make a passive income of something like £30 million a year. So that is something like £500,000 a week. Passive income. What I mean is you make that just from the assets that you own. Mm-hmm. It is impossible to spend that. It is impossible to spend that amount of money. And there's obviously some people much richer even than him. They have to buy all the rest of the assets. They basically have no choice. They're so rich. I mean, if you were making £500,000 every week, how much would you spend?
I don't know.
100 grand, live like the Queen. You know what I mean? And then you don't even do it yourself. The rest of your money gets managed by your family office, which is basically some guy who all he does is buy assets. He buys assets. So these guys, they become a black hole. They suck things out of the economy, right? So as you transfer wealth away from the middle class and the government, who are groups of people who spend basically everything they get, and you give that money to the rich, who use that money to buy assets.
Just for a second, by assets, you mean stock?
I mean,
houses.
At the end of the day, it's
companies.
Most of it is physical assets. I mean, it could be companies, but companies own physical assets, right? They will own the property. A big part of it is debt. So they will own your mortgage. They will own the German government debt. They will own the British government debt. But they will own. I like to sort of get people thinking about what wealth is, not just houses. Walk down the high street. Look at the shopping centres. You got Aldi, you got Lidl, you got the pubs, you got the restaurants. Somebody owns all of that. You got the skyscrapers in the centre of town. Somebody owns those skyscrapers.
I want to buy a football club.
I would love to buy a football club, yeah. But
that's a great asset.
Unfortunately, I'm not as rich as I would have been. Otherwise, I could have bought my local football club.
Which one?
Leyton Orient is my team. Yeah, mentioned a number of times in the book, which is a third-tier team in the East. These are actually... Oh, no. I thought I was wearing my Leyton Orient socks.
Could be like a second Wrexham.
Yeah, I'm not as famous as Ryan Reynolds, though. Maybe one day.
Not yet.
Yeah, if I keep doing things like this. You never know.
So, going back to like the middle class, being like on a global level the exception to the rule.
Yeah, it's really important that people understand that, because
so maybe there was a reason in Western Europe and America for this exception.
Yeah, this is one thing that the French economist Thomas Piketty is very good at, which he goes through the history of inequality. And I think people like to have this kind of assumption that history just gets better and better and life gets better over time. Mm-hmm. But living standards were very, very bad, even for Western Europeans, right up until the Second World War most of the time. And then suddenly in the Second World War, after the Second World War, in the aftermath, you have this big decrease in inequality, which is largely because governments basically took assets from the rich and borrowed money and then essentially defaulted on their debt. Mm-hmm. You get this massive decrease in inequality after the Second World War. And it's only then you get this kind of golden period of history where people like my dad, I grew up in a very immigrant part of London. And we had a lot of people come over from India, from Pakistan, from East Africa. And they just worked, they worked in corner shops, a lot of these people, and were able to buy 2, 3, 4 properties. Mm-hmm. We had this rare period in history after World War II where inequality was significantly lower, tax on the rich was significantly higher. So you found in the Beatles, this famous song, Taxman, where they complain, it's 1 for you, 19 for me. They complain about paying 95% top income tax. Now, I'm not advocating a 95% top income tax, but people forget, after World War, in the UK, and the US tax rates are very similar. 95% top income tax, 90% top inheritance tax. I don't think it's a coincidence, in that time of history, ordinary people without advanced degrees doing ordinary jobs could afford to buy property. If you don't prevent the rich from getting very, very rich, they can use that wealth to outcompete you for property.
But what was the reason for this high taxation?
You'd have to be a historian, really. You might know more than me. But I think, people obviously lived through.
I mean, I think first of all, the countries were destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, you have, of course.
The government needed money.
People lived through 2 world wars in the 20th century, right? And World War II was this horrible thing. People were drafted. Loads of people were sent to fight, to die, to watch their friends die. And you watch this kind of crazy thing happen where for 6 years, the whole of Europe spends every penny it can on killing each other. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, the government was able to provide basically everybody back home with housing and food and healthcare and education. And people come back from the war saying, wait a minute, if we're not going to devote our entire economies to killing each other, maybe we should still get housing and healthcare and food and education. And, this thing happened, which is quite an interesting historical thing in Britain, which is obviously the Prime Minister of Britain in World War II was Winston Churchill, and he's kind of revered as this, like, the best Britain ever in the minds of a lot of British people. And yet, British people came back from the war and immediately voted him out. Because what they wanted was a government that said, we're going to protect your housing and your healthcare and your food and education. And when you have this recent historical example of the war, which makes it very, very clear that we can afford that, it makes it very, very difficult for rich people to push this narrative, oh, sorry, we can't offer you that, because you've just spent 6 years doing it, whilst also devoting your entire economy to basically murder. So I think World War II creates this situation where people just demanded it. People demand, and that's what I'm calling for now. What I'm saying is demand it. But also, government was very, very strong because of the war. So they were able to basically say, look, we own the assets and we're going to provide the people with what they need.
Would be nice with, having the demand of the people without going through a war, though.
I don't want. Of course, why do you think I do?
That would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, listen. That is what I do. That is why I do what I do. Yeah. That is why. Listen, I'm.
Let's have a war of words.
I'm an economist, not a historian. But part of the build-up to the wars of the 20th century was economic commiseration. People were economically impoverished. They, of course, we had the Great Depression, which was very extreme here in Germany, but it was in a lot of countries. People demanded change, and that creates this opportunity for the far right to come in and say, we'll give you change. That's part of the story. That is part of the story. And when you look now, this period of extreme economic growing immiseration, a growing far right, it's really hard for me not to be reminded of the early 20th century. And, we've just had Labour Party win the election in the UK. I spoke before the election. My big fear is, we've had the public reject the centre-right, which is the Conservatives. Now they voted in the centre-left. In my opinion, the Labour Party is not serious about reducing inequality. They won't reduce inequality, which means living standards will continue to fall. Where do the public turn next? Where do the public turn after that? And that I've told you the story of the UK.
Right.
The story of Germany is extremely similar.
I mean,
it's extremely similar, and it's not just this is everywhere in the Western world. This is happening. The centre right and the centre left. Neither of them are serious about inequality. They continue to fail. People demand an alternative, and people sometimes ask me what gives me hope. We will get change. We will get change. I guarantee you, we will get change. Because it is increasingly obvious to an increasing majority of people that the status quo is not working, that all it delivers for ordinary families is increased poverty and reduced standard of living. And people will demand political change. The problem is that political change doesn't have to be positive. And that's why I do what I do.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of Max Horkheimer, the famous German Jewish philosopher, like who always, like he's famous for saying in 1939 when he left Germany, like, don't talk about fascism if you don't want to talk about capitalism. Because like his theory was like capitalism eventually leads to fascism. Which
it did it then, and it looks like it could go that way now, but I'll do everything I can to make it go a better way.
You were talking about in the last election cycle in Great Britain, you talked about about labor politicians, and they didn't really see inequality as a winning issue.
Yeah.
In Germany, when you talk to like center left or center right politicians about inequality, they never want to talk about wealth inequality. They always want to talk about income inequality.
Yeah.
Is that the same in Great Britain? When I explicitly asked them about wealth inequality, because there's no taxation on wealth in Germany.
Yeah.
And they always answer with, this income inequality is a good issue. Like,
yeah, I think that's. I'm often confronted with this question of,
because it's
they
like for people like the layman, like he doesn't understand, or she doesn't understand that wealth and income are two different things.
Well, I think it's very important people understand wealth and income are different things.
Yeah,
because there's this thing that's happening now where I say we need to tax the rich, and I'm talking about the truly wealthy, people with the wealth of £10 million, or Rishi Sunak, £700 million, and there's a lot of these super wealthy families. These are the real threat. Yeah. But of course, your ordinary man on the street, he doesn't know anyone worth £700 million, all right? Mm-hmm. But when I was a kid, and I thought, what's rich? For me, rich at the time was you make 60 grand a year, because my dad made like 20 grand a year. Oh. So like 60 grand a year, that's rich. And you think of when somebody says to you wealth, you think in terms of income, because you don't know people who own wealth, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is, then when I go out and say we need to tax the rich, and I'm talking about these super rich people who an ordinary person will never reach that. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people think, I'm saying I want to tax you, I want to tax your son who's a doctor, I want to tax your brother who's a banker. It's and I think there's a kind of intentional obfuscation, and I think it's partially pushed by these groups of the media that are paid to fight against taxation of the rich, to basically confuse people about wealth and income. But the truth is, you look at what's happened to house prices in the last 10, 20, 30 years. Increasingly, wealth is kind of all that matters. Like, I've got friends who earn 2-3 times average income in London that can't afford a house.
What?
Yeah, because a house in London, like a decent house, is costing you £700,000, £800,000. Average income is like £35,000. So you can be making £70,000, £80,000.
Wow.
It's very, very, very difficult to own property. And this is a consequence of wealth inequality, right? As the rich get richer, asset prices go up. And then it creates a situation where the only thing that matters is asset ownership. And you're kind of, really, in a sense, this question about income versus inequality is about capitalism. Because people have been sold this idea that capitalism is a system where anybody can get rich from working. Whereas in reality nowadays, that's basically impossible. Capitalism is over. There's only one way to get rich in today's society. Rich dad. That's how you get rich. If you didn't get a rich dad, try again. Like there's no other way. Mm-hmm. This is the world that we live in. It's income doesn't really matter anymore because there's no social mobility.
But the rich would point to you and your example. Like you come from a poor background.
Yeah, and that's what they always do.
You're rich now. So the system was working.
But we lived in a society where basically everybody who worked a job could afford a house. And then we moved to a situation where 50% of working people can afford a house. 20% of working people can afford a house. 10% of working people can afford a house. You could go to the really, really extremely unequal place in the world. You go to Nigeria. There will be one guy in Nigeria who rose from poverty and made himself rich. There always will be one guy who's done that. And that guy will get used as the example. But what matters is the statistics, the percentage of people who come from poverty who are able to reach financial security. And that's falling and falling.
One could say the system needs that exception to the rule
Yeah, because people need
Otherwise,
hope.
their entire scheme falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the story,
we
right?
need someone like Gary Stevenson.
Yeah, it's part of the story, right? People like me get used to support this idea, well, if you work hard,
right,
you'll make it. But I don't know anyone else who did it.
Tell us about yourself. You were born in 1987.
86. I think on my Wikipedia is 87. It's 86. I don't know why. But 86. Just turned 38.
Well, maybe the Wikipedia editors
trying to make me
are
younger.
watching this. It's 86.
It's 86. Born in 86. East London. Suburb called Ilford, which is a very South Asian suburb. Lots of Indians, lots of Pakistanis.
Mm-hmm. What did your parents do?
My dad worked for the post office for 35 years.
Like a mailman?
He wasn't a mailman. A lot of people keep saying he was a mailman. He was just like, he was doing some clerical role, I think, sorting office, this kind of thing.
Okay.
My mum was largely a stay-at-home mum. She worked for a few years as a social worker, but mainly stay-at-home mum.
Well, that's good. So dad made enough money to provide for all of you.
Yeah, I mean, we were poor. We lived in like a small house. It was quite crowded.
You had a house?
Yeah,
well,
had the house and they owned it. They eventually managed to pay it off. Yeah, it was, not the best house, but it was a house, and he was able to buy it with a mortgage and pay it off gradually. Probably bought the house for something ridiculous like £20,000 or £30,000, something crazy like that.
Mm-hmm. You had siblings?
Yeah, older brother, younger sister. Mm-hmm. Crowded house, little terraced housing. You have that terraced housing here. It's this British terraced housing. It's like a long row of houses all connected together. Kids playing in the street. There was a little railway behind the house. Yeah, it was kind of a poor area of London. There was a sort of abandoned factory on one end of the street. And
did you go to private school or something?
No. So I went to regular school up until 11. And then in the UK, we still have this thing called the 11 plus. You know what the 11 plus is?
No.
So it used to be...
You mean 11th grade or 11 years old?
It's an exam called the 11 plus that you take when you're 10, which is supposed to determine what education you get from 11 onwards. And...
So it's like a educational segregation.
Yeah, and this used to be like really common across the country in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s. And the idea is they're trying to sort of find the smart poor kids and they funnel them into these grammar schools, which they're free, but they're kind of supposed to like give poor kids a kind of education comparable to the private schools.
Okay.
They've been phased out now, but there are still some around. So I passed this exam when I was 10, which meant I went to one of these grammar schools, which was a lot more middle class. Yeah.
Did you know before that you were a smart kid?
I was always good, especially at maths in school growing up. My brother also passed that exam. He was older than me, so he'd pass, so I thought maybe I'd pass as well. But I was, especially at maths, I was like very, very bright from a young age.
Did you ever consider doing something with your math skills?
Well,
when you were a kid?
What would you? I mean, I was in the maths team in my grammar school, and we won a couple of competitions.
I'm gonna be a scientist.
Oh, not
an economist, but like a scientist.
No, I'm from East London, and East London. There's two financial centres in London, which is the City, which is the old one, the City of London, which is on the east end of central London, and there's Canary Wharf, which is in East London. In the old docks. The docks obviously like stopped being used because London stopped being like the big trade centre. And it got turned into this new financial centre. And all of these skyscrapers went up when I was about 8 or 9, they started going up. And back then, if you were young and you wanted to be rich, you wanted to make money, and you're from London, especially East London, I'm going to go if you're good at maths. If you're good at science, you're going to be a doctor or a dentist. If you're good at maths, you're going to go be a banker. It wasn't even a question. Everybody figured that's what you would do.
But didn't you did you have to graduate from grammar school first, then go to university, and then go into this financial hub?
That was, because I was at this grammar school, which is very middle class, and I was going to school basically with a lot of middle class British Indians.
Oh.
And I think they got the knowledge from their family, basically. Like, the best job is be a banker. If you want to be a banker, you've got to go to Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, London School of Economics. So I actually got expelled from that grammar school for selling a very small amount of drugs when I was 16. But I still had all of those friends, and they just said to me, you need to take maths A-level. It's like you're 16 to 18.
You got expelled from grammar school?
Yeah, when I was 16.
And you were like, and your parents were like, great. Like,
I was.
You were selling what?
I was a bit of a. I wasn't that close to my parents. I was kind of a. I was a middle child, and I was kind of out on the streets. You know what I mean? It was a small, crowded house, and I think they kind of knew. My parents are very religious, so I'd kind of sort of. I'm going to go. And
Christian.
They're Mormons, actually. Do you know about Mormons?
Yeah.
Mormons are. Yeah, my parents. I mean, it's a kind of Christianity. Yeah.
It's a weird.
It's a kind of. It's a bit like the Jehovah's Witness. It's a very American.
Yeah.
Quite ascetic. We don't drink coffee. Don't swear. That kind of thing. I'm not Mormon anymore. But
Oh, you were a Mormon as well.
well, I mean, your parents are Mormon. You're Mormon when you're a kid, right? Yeah. But I sort of.
But your dad only had one wife.
He only had one. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. Yeah,
They don't do that anymore.
Only one wife. Yeah, they banned that a while ago. But yeah, so I wasn't that close to my parents. I was just kind of when I was a kid, I was ambitious. I wanted to make money. I wanted to be rich. You know, I was a smart kid at school, and you just think like, yeah, I want to see what I can do with this.
But you got expelled from grammar school.
Yeah.
With 16.
At 16, yeah.
What happened? Like, did you go to another school?
Well, yeah, and it was really hard. I had to study at home for a year. I didn't even have a desk at home, so I had to lie on the floor and put this wooden board and do my like French homework and do my maths homework, do my chemistry homework at home. But I got really good grades, and then I had to like try and get into another school. Like I've got really good grades, but I got expelled for selling drugs, and that was weird. But I managed to get into like a regular school, and a lot of my friends from when I was like 7 or 8 were in that school, right? Because I'd gone off to the grammar school, and then I came back.
And you graduated from...
Yeah, and then I didn't get expelled again, yeah, and I got really good grades, and then from there I managed to go into London School of Economics, which is, some people might not know about it, but it's a very prestigious economic school in London.
How do you get in there?
I just had really good grades. I had, you know, top grades in maths, top grades in... I didn't take economics A-level because it wasn't available at my school. I had 4 A's, which is like the best you could get. In maths, physics, English, literature, and sociology, and that was enough, basically.
Were you like a political?
Not.
Were you political in your youth?
When I was a kid, I was not political.
You didn't care at all?
No, I do remember. I remember the Iraq War and being like, whoa, like
I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
I remember I was still in grammar school, and my history teacher said like, oh, they're going to invade Iraq, and I remember thinking, what? Why? Yeah. But I was a kid, man. I was just a typical kid, like typical boy. Just wanted to make money. I wasn't really interested in politics and stuff like that. I mean, I think you look back and you see, obviously I grew up poor going to this grammar school and poor in London. So you see the inequality around you, but you're just kind of, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it.
Did you go vote when there was an election?
I always voted, yeah. Who
did you vote when you were younger?
I think I used to vote Lib Dems when I was a kid. I told myself at the Iraq War, I can't vote for these guys. They just seem like a bunch of wankers, basically.
Tony Blair was in power. He was Labour. So
yeah, when would have been the first election I could have voted? 2005, maybe? Yeah, I would have been 18. Yeah.
Labour won there?
Yeah. No, was it 2005? Yeah, 2005.
I think they
2010.
lost 2009 or 2010, right?
2010, yeah.
Who did your parents vote for?
My mum used to vote Lib Dem.
Really?
I think. And my dad used to vote Conservative. My dad was one of them, like, he thought Margaret Thatcher was super cool. Because, you know, people did, when Margaret Thatcher came in 79, my dad would have been 23. You know, at that time, obviously, you know, this is before we were born, but she was the first, like, major female leader of, like, any major country, right?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, and she had a vibe. And I think a lot of young people were like, you know,
cool.
Yeah, it's cool. We're going to have a woman leader and this. And my dad's very sort of, they were poor, but it's just this kind of classic, respectable English working class, you know. We just get by, you know, we just want to work hard, this kind of thing. Yeah, that was kind of his vibe.
So you went to LSE, London School of Economics. How long did that last? Because like, when did you go to CitiBank? How did you get?
So 3 years at LSE, which was 05 to 08.
So we were like 18 till 21 or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do your bachelor there? Or
yeah, did my bachelor there.
All right.
Yeah. I did really well. Had really, really good grades at LSE.
Did you, like, when you did your courses and all that, like, did you realize what we were talking about earlier about economics and all this? Or
but you know,
were you young and naive?
No. You know, I said to you before, like, economists don't care about the economy. This was really obvious at LSE. Like, I didn't study economics because I liked economics. I studied economics because I wanted to get a well-paid job.
Right.
I didn't go to the London School of Economics because I liked economics. I went to London School of Economics because I wanted to get a good job. And
make good money.
almost everybody there was like that. This is an interesting thing about economics nowadays. Like, people don't really go into economics or study economics because they're interested in the economy. It's just considered a good degree to get a good job. Mm-hmm. So it, in a sense, it doesn't make sense to ask me, did you realize economics was full of shit when you're an undergrad?
Right.
Because I didn't give a fuck if it's full of shit or not. Like, I wasn't there to learn about the economy. I was there to get a good job, and everybody was there to get a good job, and I did get a good job. So for me, like, you know, you might as well say to me, like, did you learn that astrology was full of shit? You know what I mean? Because I wasn't there to learn about the economy. I was there to get a job. You know what I'm saying? You know.
So, as you said, you came from a poor background, and you were studying at LSE. What about other students?
Oh, LSE is like such a mad place. Like, it's LSE, very, very international and extreme international. Like, I think my course is probably, 60 or 70, maybe even more, 75% international students. Mm-hmm. And these guys, like, they're from all over. Like, there's a lot of Asians, so Chinese, Pakistanis, Indians.
By guys, you mean mostly male?
Well, I said economics is skews quite male. So it probably would have been, my course probably would have been 75% male.
Wow.
But it's kind of, you know, you don't realise, obviously you grew up in England. Of course, we have our famous class system, and we learn to, like, recognise class quite quickly. But you go to school with a bunch of, like, Pakistanis and Indians. And I grew up with Pakistanis and Indians, so I just thought they were the same as the kids I grew up with. But you get to know them and you realise, like, these guys' dads, like, run the country that they come from. Like, that's, you sort of, like Gaddafi's kids went to LSE. When I was at LSE. Yeah,
from
Gaddafi's
Libya.
kids. Yeah. That's like, and that's kind of what it is, right? Like, everybody is there. Their parents, you know, are basically part of the ruling class, you know, in some sense. You know, and that's the kind of people who are there.
Reminds me of Adam Tooze telling me that Xi Jinping's kids go to Harvard these days.
That's the thing. And what's so funny is, like, these guys, they're there to get a good job and make money, but they don't actually need the money because they're from rich families, right? And they're kind of there to meet each other and get married in a weird way. And then they're just going to, like, work for Goldman Sachs for, like, 3 or 4 years. And if they manage to hit it big at Goldman Sachs, they'll stick around. But that's the thing. I think these like very wealthy people from, like, poorer countries, they try to, like, geographically diversify. They want to, like, make, like, an offshoot of their family that's, like, secure in New York and secure in London, and they're kind of, like, spreading their wealth around the world, kind of thing.
Did you have? I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but did you, like, date, like, a famous rich girl from India or something, or from Libya?
Because obviously I knew LSE would get me a good job, but I didn't know LSE was like that. Like, when I was a kid, I thought university was like
people don't tell you? Like, people don't...
I didn't know nothing. I was 18, right? I thought, the only thing I knew about... No one in my family had ever been to university. I thought it was going to be like American Pie. Have you seen American Pie?
Of course.
Yeah, I thought it was just going to be, like, parties and getting drunk and getting laid. And, like, we had this, like, trip early on to some, like, country manor. And I bought, like, a 3-litre bottle of cider. And I was like, we're going to get, like, pissed. And, like, everybody met in one room. And I went to that room, I knocked on the door. I opened the door, they were playing chess in there. These guys are fucking playing chess. And I was like, I bought my cider, and they were like, don't spill it on the floor. That's what it was like. Like, it's we were in the maths department. You know, maths kids are kind of like geeks, basically. It was kind of like a geeky vibe, really, maths. And but it was, I'm good at maths, and I liked it. But to be honest, like,
I just imagined, like, Gaddafi's daughter, like, finding you cute at LSE. And like trying to...
I couldn't speak for that.
And trying to ask you out, and then realizing, oh, he's like just a poor dude from East London.
No,
bye-bye.
There was no question about whether I was a poor dude from East London. I used to wear this... I used to have this Echo tracksuit, which is like a onesie kind of thing, and it had a big rhino on the front. And like I remember one of my friends from Singapore said to me, like, I couldn't understand the word that you said when you came in. I couldn't understand anything that you said because I had quite a strong East London accent. Like it was obvious. It was obvious. And it was quite funny. Like my plan was, because at home when I was in like at school, I never used to do my homework. I didn't have a desk in my house. And I was like, at uni, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit at the front of every lecture. I'm going to sit at the front of every class. And if I don't understand anything, I'm going to ask a question. And LSE, like first year economics lectures, are in a massive West End theatre with like 1,000 people. And nobody sits at the front row. And I got my first proper girlfriend that year. So I would be like, and she was 1 year below, so she was still in high school in Ilford. And I'd be like with her, then I'd be rushing to the lecture, like running to the front in my like Echo tracksuit, my little like string hood. I had a string bag just like this, which I had all my stuff in. And I'd just sit at the front and ask questions. And I think people thought I was mad. And then when I, like, first year, I got really good grades, suddenly, like, I become, like, kind of, like, famous. And I remember, like, and this is a conversation in the book, I said to one of my friends, why does everybody, like, know who I am suddenly? And he was like, because your grades are good. But this guy I was speaking to come number 1 in maths first year. Sagamalde is his name. And I said, but your grades are better than mine. And he goes, yeah, but nobody expected it from you. And I was like, that was the first time I ever realised, like, because obviously I was always like the poor kid in school, but I was also always the smart kid. And it never even occurred to me that people would be like, oh, he must be dumb. And that was the first time I realised that rich people think poor people are dumb. It's the first time I ever realised that. And I kind of used that in a lot of my career, basically.
And poor people must be dumb because...
Otherwise, they wouldn't be poor.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Basically, I think it's a funny thing. Like when you're rich, you need to justify it to yourself. You know, like if you're rich, like most people who are rich because their dad's rich, right?
Right.
But you don't want to believe the reason I'm rich is because my dad's rich. You want to believe the reason I'm rich is because we're better, right? So you need to believe that to believe that your inherited wealth and your inherited position in society is justified, you need to believe that poor people are stupid or poor people are lazy, right? Of course, you need to believe that.
I mean, we're talking about Mormons or Mormonism before, but maybe that's the cult of the rich.
Yeah, there's this quote, isn't there?
There's religion.
Yeah, there's this quote from Voltaire, isn't there? If there were no God, we'd have to create him. And I think kind of nowadays I see a lot of what the book is about, really. I think in our modern like post-religious society, there's this kind of gap for religiosity. And I think money has massively filled that gap. If you look at the way people approach money, approach wealth, these kinds of beliefs that the rich are better, it seems religious in its nature.
I will ask you about crypto and all this shit
I
later.
mean, that seems so much like a religion.
Stay tuned, guys. You were talking about the famous class system in Great Britain, and how do you recognize class at your school at uni?
British people can recognize it immediately.
But tell a German, because in Germany the rich, they kind of try to avoid being spotted.
So it's how you dress, it's how you carry yourself. A massive part of it is how you talk. A massive part of it is accent.
How do rich people talk compared to poor people?
Well, they will talk in your classic English, what do they call it? Received pronunciation. They pronounce all of their letters, you know. I always remember, you know David Beckham, obviously. You know who David Beckham is?
This footballer.
Yeah, so David Beckham is from East London. He's from Leighton, actually, which is where my team is, Leighton Orient. And in East London, we don't pronounce our T's, right? Water, party, later, right? That's like, and then, so David Beckham didn't pronounce his T's. And I remember one day, I watched an interview with him, and he suddenly started pronouncing his T's. My fucking heart broke like that. I couldn't believe it. And that's because somebody had obviously told him, you know, you're going to be a global star now. You've got to start pronouncing your T's. But that's like, and when I was a kid, I remember people saying that to me, like, if you want to be successful, you've got to change how you talk.
Did you?
Of course not. There's no point being successful if you change who you are. What's the point? That's what I said to him anyway. But it didn't stop me, but I think it does hold me back sometimes now, even in media. I honestly think one of the reasons I don't get more TV stuff is because if I go on TV and talk about economics, there will be a lot of people that will watch it and be like, who the fuck is this guy? He's not an economist. And that's just like deeply, because people can recognize immediately my class background.
But you are an economist.
Yeah, I am. But, you know, you don't see economists that sound like me on the BBC, do you? You don't. And people don't expect that. Like, people that talk like me are allowed on the BBC to talk about football and talk about music. They're not allowed on TV to talk about economics.
That's also kind of a class structure as well.
It's just, it's still there, it's still there, I can't speak what the situation is here, but people, when the producers are thinking about putting me on, they're going to be like, oh, well, he's a bit of a risk, because people will look and be like, who is this guy? Straight away it pops, right? Like people are like, why is this guy allowed on Talk About Economics? In the UK, that's the way that it is. Like it's still there, and it's, there's not a lot of regional accents, local accents on TV talking about important things. It's still true in the UK.
So going back to your time at LSE, you finished your 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you couldn't have foreseen getting into a CitiBank.
Yeah.
What was your original plan?
I didn't have a plan. Well, I was quite naive, right? Like, I was young and naive. I was going in, you just think, like, I was very good at maths, right, as a kid. So I just thought, like, I'm going to study, I'm going to kill my exams, and then I'm going to get a job. Like that's what you're told when you're a kid, right? If you do really well in school, you'll get a job.
Get a job where?
At a bank. I mean, couldn't even told you who the banks were. Probably when I was a kid, I knew the British ones, like Barclays, RBS. I didn't really. I just figured I'd figure that out. But then when you get there, so first year, study quite hard, get quite good grades. First year was quite easy, to be honest. And then I was like, fine, we're just going to keep doing that. We're going to keep studying, get good grades. You go in second year. Second year is mad. Everyone's just gone crazy. Like people start coming in wearing suits, just like for no reason. They come in to lectures wearing suits, and they start talking about banks all the time. And there's this like language, right? Like, oh, we're going to be CDSs, CDOs, MBSs, M&A, IBD, all of these things, right? Like all of these 3-letter acronyms, right? I see that I'm pronouncing my T's. See, getting posh.
Mm-hmm.
People start using these acronyms, and I was just like, what on earth is going on? Where did they learn all this? And why are they doing this? Why are they so that, like, people didn't even go to lectures because they were going to like finance society events, basically investment society events. And I was like, why? Like we've got 2 more years left, right, before we finish. Why are people so obsessed with banks now?
Right.
And basically the way it works is the jobs kind of get given out in your second year. You need to apply for an internship in your second year. The internships are like super competitive. So these guys will apply for like 25, 30 investment bank internships. And they'll get an internship in their second year. And then if you do well in your internship, 50% of the interns will get a job.
Right.
So actually, it's all decided in the second year, which is a big problem for me, right? Because my plan was to get really good grades.
Right.
But in your second year, you don't have your grades yet. Mm-hmm. So, and I think this is like super interesting that actually the jobs are given out before the grades are given out. So then how do you decide who to give the job to
right.
if you don't have the grades yet? Well, the answer is you have to send CV and cover letter. But, everybody's got like, well, nobody has their grades yet. So it basically comes down to what are your extracurriculars? And all of these guys from rich families, they knew this and their parents knew this from when they were kids. So they've made sure that their kids have some like really impressive extracurriculars. So like this guy will have been like head of the Junior United Nations, and this guy will have like played the clarinet at the Royal Albert Hall, and this guy would have like founded a charity that drives dirt bikes through the Sahara Desert for some reason. Everybody's doing some mad thing, which I didn't know I had to do that. And I was just like I worked for a sofa shop, like fluffing pillows on the weekend. That's all I had. Or I tried to be a grime rapper. That's like what I was doing. And everyone has this mad stuff. So you realize that actually all of these jobs will be given out based on like how good you are at clarinet, which is basically how posh you are, right? So I was like,
But why do the banks or investment banks do it that way? Wouldn't they want to have like the smartest guys?
It's a good question. Why do they do it that way?
Because that doesn't sound like...
It doesn't seem efficient, does it?
No.
Why do the banks do that? Why do the banks do that? I'm not sure, to be honest. But the thing is, it gets you... In the end, everybody applies, right? So they can choose who they want. Right. Why don't they wait for the grades to come out? I'm not sure. Maybe they just want...
Well, maybe the rich just want to hire other rich.
It gives them a chance. So say you're a rich investment banker and your son is like not that smart and he's at uni with me. Mm-hmm. You want the jobs to be given out before the grades given out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think it kind of does work. But then CitiBank, I found out, hired one trader a year through a card game.
Card game.
a card game, which was just purely a numbers-based game. It's supposed to simulate trading, but it was purely a numbers-based game. And somebody came up to me in the library one time and just said, "Oh, hey, like, are you Gary?" And like, they must have known about me. I know now that CitiBank used to pay people to like try and find us the smart students. So they were doing this as well. And he said, "Go play this card game. If you win the card game, you can get a job."
Explain to us what this kind of card game was.
The card is just basically a betting game. So like, there's 5 of us on the table. There's a deck of cards, some low cards and some high cards. We all get a card, and there's some cards in the middle which get turned over during the game. And we basically bet with each other on what the total of all the cards in the game will be. So if I've got a higher card, I know the total is going to be high. And I was like really turned on by this immediately because you know I spoke before about how it frustrates me that in economics you're not allowed to compete with the other economists. Here was it, and what that means that basically protects rich people and posh people because I'm not allowed to compete with them. It's the same for this, giving the jobs out before the grades. I'm not allowed to compete with them. It's like, well, here's a game. You could be the Prince of England, but if we play a game, it's fair. You know, and there's no like prior knowledge. Bam. And I was like, I knew straight away, well, in hindsight, that's what I say, but I thought straight away, like, I've got a good chance of winning this because...
But it wasn't poker. Like, what do you call the game?
The game is called, in the book it's called The Trading Game, which is the English title of the book.
Okay.
And that's what you called it, the trading game.
All right. And did you like train for it? Or like?
Well, so somebody told me in advance the rules of the game. So I there were 2 rounds. There was an LSE round and a final. But somebody told me in advance the rules of the game, which I probably have to be honest, is kind of cheating. But that's the way that it goes. I guess you use the advantages you have. And I knew...
Gary Stevenson cheated his way into CitiBank.
Yeah. Listen, everybody...
And became a millionaire.
Everybody cheats their way in. Everybody cheats their way in. If you either know somebody or you find an angle. This is the world, mate.
Well, the rich cheat by having extra...
Yeah, and I cheat by winning a game. But whatever, I won this game. I think this tells you in a way something beautiful about the world of today, which is that I was, one of the number 1 students in the whole university, and yet the only way for me to get a job was to cheat at a card game. I think that's the world that we live in.
Yeah,
basically.
that's the irony of your story. Actually.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I figured out how the other economic students would play the game, which was that they would become kind of fixated on the numbers. And like some people would have high cards. There's a thing that a student who studied a mathematical discipline will do, which is they want to immediately work out the numbers of the game. So if you give someone this game and they've got a high card, almost anybody with like university level numerical training will do this statistical calculation where they try to calculate the expected value. And that's like what the maths say my number is. So if I've got a really high card, I might think the total is going to be like 75. And if you've got a really low card, you might think the total is going to be 65 or say 60. And then you'll be betting around 60, he'll be betting around 75. You're just doing the numbers. And I would just be buying from him at 60, selling to him at 75 again and again and again and again and again. And it shouldn't work, but it did work. And I think that's because I understood at the time the weaknesses in the way that economists think. And I think it's a nice little kind of set piece at the beginning of the book because really my whole career and even now, that's what I do is I look at the way economists think about the economy and I look at what's actually happening and I try and work out what's missing. Where's the gap, basically? And that's all of my money.
Without a cheat code.
Yeah, well, I don't cheat no more. Yeah, although I think in some ways growing up poor is a cheat code in a weird way because nowadays so few people reach advanced levels in economics, like prestigious university levels, coming from a poor background. In the world of economics discussion is full of people who have been rich their whole lives. And I think if you have, and I believe we do have, a crisis of inequality, how much of that can you ever understand if you're rich? Because a crisis of inequality is great for the rich. So all they see is, and I always remember one conversation I had at Oxford with these professors, when I was just screaming at them, why are you not talking about what's happening? Why are you not talking about falling living standards, unaffordable housing? And one of these guys turned around and said to me, what do you mean? The economy's getting better. And you couldn't help but hear these 2 missing words, like echoing off the wood-panelled walls, right? The economy's getting better for us. So this is the thing. What I made my money on was betting that the economy wouldn't get better after 2008. But all of these rich guys who I was playing with, for them it was getting better, and they couldn't understand why the economy wasn't improving, because everybody they know is making tons of money, right? They don't see that ordinary families are losing their houses. They don't see that ordinary families are falling into poverty. So I think actually, in a world, where everybody is from a rich background, even though I'm not poor anymore, having that experience of growing up poor and having family that have been poor and having friends that are poor, that gives you such a better understanding of what's really happening than most people in the world of economic debate.
There's a famous German author, Bertolt Brecht, who coined the phrase, they wouldn't be rich if everyone else wouldn't be poor, weren't poor.
Yeah.
Okay, so you played the trading game, you won at LSE.
Yeah.
And then there was like a final at CitiBank in London?
CitiBank, yeah.
Like with the music?
Yeah,
and,
there was 25 kids there, 5 each from the 5 top unis, whatever they were. So we all went there. And I'd spent like the previous 3 weeks.
Like, did you take your parents with you and like? Yeah.
No. So I'm not that kind of. I was like man on a mission. I spent the previous like 3, maybe there was like 3 weeks between the first round and the final, and I spent that whole time just playing the game. I'd taught all my mates the game. I was like holed up in one room in the library. I was like, if you're ever free, come play the game. When nobody was playing, I was like memorizing all the numbers. I was like obsessed with this game. I was like, I am going to be the best person in the world at this game. So when I went, and it was funny, the other guys weren't doing that. And in hindsight, I realized that the other guys, their plan was, we're just going to go there. We're going to make a good show of it. We're going to try and network somebody. We're going to try and like put that name on our application form, and they're going to help us in. So the other guys actually, like most of them got internships throughout networking. I think this again is like a fascinating insight into the way that rich people think and the way that poor people think. Like poor people think like, unless I win, I'm out. Yeah. Whereas rich people think like, well, I'll meet the right person, I'll get in. You know, and it kind of worked for them basically.
Doesn't matter if I win or not.
Yeah, and I was by the time we went in, I was damn good at this game basically. And
you won.
Yeah, I got through to the final of the final. And it's a good story in the book. I'm not sure I should ruin it actually, but there's a shock in the final of the final where there's a sort of a trick played on me. But the end of the story is that I was given a job. I was given an internship.
So like, did like the manager of CitiBank London come to you and were like, congratulations, Mr. Stevenson. Welcome to CitiBank.
Yeah, it was basically, that was it. Yeah, I got an internship.
Stop by on Monday to...
I had a load of internships. I came in, I spent the whole time buying people hamburgers, and they loved it, and they gave me a job. And that would have been, I would have interned summer 2007.
So CitiBank, though, is an American investment bank.
Yeah.
What's the difference between an American investment bank in London and a British one?
The main difference between the American and the European ones is we don't have to wear suits. I remember I walked in this like really cheap suit that I had with like a big tie, and the boss was like, no suits, no ties.
Why?
That's kind of the culture. I can't speak for now, but back then...
Like they don't want class to be recognized?
I don't think it was about class. It's about the way the traders' self-image. Like the traders see themselves as kind of like rugged and we're here to make money. It's like, it's not a... You know, they kind of see themselves as like meritocratic and like, you know, they're playing the game. Like they see themselves as like rough and ready kind of thing. That's what they did at the time.
The game of what? Finance?
So this is the thing in a way, like I think a lot of people think that my book is like a criticism of the finance system. But in a way it's kind of a love letter to trading in a way. And it's weird I say that because you read the book and you'll be like, this guy works with a bunch of maniacs. But what...
I mean, you were a maniac yourself.
Yeah, and I was, and you know that's a big part of the story of the book. But you go to LSE, and nobody cares about the economy, right? And now, like in the last sort of 5-10 years of my life, I've been like trying to like fix the economy, and like nobody seems to care about the economy. On the trading floor, these people really, really, really want to be right. They really, really want to be right. And it's coming from a kind of a selfish place. They want to make money. They want to be prestigious. They want to be the best. They want to be recognized as the best. But at least they fucking want to be right. And it drives me so mad doing the work that I do now. That I'm right and I bet on it every year and I make money every year. And what I'm right on is shit collapsing. And politicians and the media, they don't give a fuck.
What's the game? What kind of game did you...
The game is trading. The game is...
Trade what?
So I traded interest rates. When I was a professional trader, I traded interest rates.
How did you get into interest trading? Like, did your boss at CitiBank were like, hi, Gary?
Yeah, you do an internship, and you're put on 2 desks, 5 weeks on credit trading, who are the guys who blew the world up in 2008, and 5 weeks on credit and 5 weeks on interest rate trading, short-term interest rate trading, to be precise. And short-term interest rate trading was actually a really unfashionable area of trading, and credit was like super fashionable, and they both wanted to hire me. But the boss of short-term interest rates, he called me in one day when I was still at LSE. So I did my internship end of second year.
Yeah.
Then you go back for a year, and you know you've got a job, but you have to you're supposed to go back and do this big rotation system where you sit on 5 desks. The boss of short-term rates, STIR it's called, short-term interest rate trading, he called me in and he was like, listen, we don't want you to do the rotation scheme. We want you to start straight away on our desk. And if you do that, we're going to let you trade from day one. And I was just 21 years old and I was like, done. That's it. If you're going to let me trade from day one, I'm in.
Did he tell you why?
He didn't tell me why. I didn't ask why. I think just when I was a kid, and I mean, I was a kid, I was 21, I was very, very confident in my ability. Like at LSE, they used to say what job should you do? And they used to say, if you think you're really good, you should be a trader. Because in trading, you're on your own. And you go out there and you trade. And if you make money, you have to be recognized. If you think you're not that good, you should do investment banking or M&A, mergers and acquisitions, where you have to work 100 hours a week. But you'll get paid in the long run, even if you're shit. But if you're really good, you should go into trading. And basically, when I was a kid, I thought I was really good. And all I wanted was, it's the same as, when I found out I can get a job in the card game. I was like, let me at that game. Because the thing is, I went to LSE and I was surrounded by these rich kids. And it was really obvious. Not that they were dumb. They weren't even trying. The truth, they weren't even trying. That's the truth. They went to LSE to find a husband, to find a wife. They go into trading because their dad wants them to go into trading. They're not really trying.
Do something. Right?
Yeah, and I just, I went on the trading floor. I could see these guys weren't that smart. And I just was confident I can beat these guys. Give me my own trading book and I'll win this game, basically. So I wanted to if you do the rotation scheme, you're not actually trading until 2-3 years in. They were like, you can start whenever you want. So my last day was a Thursday. My last exam was a Thursday.
Right.
It was Chaos in Dynamical Systems, I remember, MA 303. And I was like, I'll start on Monday. Because I need time to buy shirts and trousers. I'll start on Monday. And I started June 30th, 2008. And I didn't really care what desk it was. Even though that was a really unpopular desk, I was like, I want to be allowed to trade. I was just I just wanted to be able to compete.
What kind of money did you make? Before we talk about how you made money by trading, did you get a fixed income? What was the starting salary?
My salary when I started, I think, was £36,000. Pound was worth more back then, so that's probably something like 50,000 euros.
And you were like, Mom, Dad, I'm rich.
Well, I didn't tell my parents because they would have asked for some. But
what did you tell your parents?
Well, I remember.
You probably told them I finished LSE.
Yeah, I just said I got a job as a trader. My mum asked me, "Oh, does that mean that you're rich then?" And I was like, oh. We'll see about that.
So you got to the short-term interest rate trading desk.
Yeah.
Tell a layman.
Yeah.
Tell the audience what the fuck does that mean? How? Yeah. What does short-term interest rate trading mean? How does it work?
If you ever hear interest rate trading, what that means is loans. These guys make loans. They lend money and they borrow money. And they're trying to borrow money for a low interest rate and lend it out at a high interest rate. That's all they're doing. That's interest rate trading. That's all. Interest rate trading is always loans.
Who do they borrow the money from? Other banks?
Other banks, but there's also customers, right? So what we would do is basically inter-country loans. So say you've got a European hedge fund or European pension fund, say, that wants to make some investments in America. So their assets, what they've got is a ton of euros, but they want to buy some US assets, so they need dollars. So they'll look for someone who will swap their euros into dollars. So they want to lend euros and borrow dollars. And it's a loan, essentially. That's what we would do. We would say, okay, we'll swap your euros into dollars, we'll borrow your euros, we'll lend you dollars. And then we would have to go out and find somebody to do the other side of the trade with. So we were always trying to, what you're looking at basically is, let me give you an example that makes it simple.
Yeah.
Say you've got a mortgage and your mortgage runs out in a year's time. And your mortgage is for €500,000. Well, you worried at the moment, like, what if European interest rates go up? I'll end up having to pay a really high rate on the mortgage. So you want to get it all sorted out now. You could call up somebody like me and say, hey, I want to borrow money for a year starting from next year. And
because I have to cover my mortgage.
Exactly, you have to cover your risk, right? And then somebody like me, we have to try and work out what would the central bank base rate be in that period, because we're going to borrow it. Essentially, the central bank, the European Central Bank, whatever, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, Federal Reserve, they decide what the rates are in the future. Right. And we're basically trying to bet what it's going to be in the future. Probably the best way to explain it is to explain explicitly the trade which I made my big money on. So imagine we're sitting here at the beginning of 2011. Base rates are zero all over the world. Europe, UK, US. But everybody thinks there's about to be a big recovery. And everybody thinks everyone's going to really start hiking the rates really quickly. So everybody's quite worried, right? They need to cover their, you've got a mortgage running out next year. You want to cover it now. You're saying, you're like, okay, I want to.
And everybody thinks next year
rates will be
interest are higher.
Everybody thinks rates will be higher next year. So right now rates are zero. So you've been cruising on these zero rates. You've borrowed money, but they're going to go up.
Yeah, probably 1%, 2%.
Yeah, so if you want to borrow money next year, that's going to cost you 1.5%.
Right.
Because everybody thinks rates going to go up.
Right.
So I thought rates are not going to go up. They're going to stay at zero. So I was going out to everybody. I'll lend you at 1.48. I'll lend you at 1.47. So I'm lending everybody money cheaper. I'm agreeing to cover your next year loan. And I'm just sitting on it. I'm holding that risk because I know that if I wait, I've agreed to lend you money for 1.48. But if I wait a year and I'm right that the central bank doesn't raise the base rate, I can borrow that money at zero.
Right.
So then I can borrow it from the European Central Bank at zero, lend it to you for 1.48. If you do that on $1 billion, what's 1.5% of $1 billion? It's $15 million, right? It's a lot of money. And that's basically what we do.
And you split it with CitiBank?
Well, I mean,
the profit.
I mean, there was. I mean, this is another sort of part of the story of the book. Is it's very mysterious. Like your P&L, they call it, profit and loss, is extremely visible.
Okay.
Everybody can see. You can see your P&L every day. Everybody can see your P&L. You can see everybody's P&L. So everybody has this number, but that's not the money that you made. That's the money you made for the bank. So that year, 2011, I made $35 million for the bank, and
you get a cut.
You do, but it's not like in your contract.
Okay.
And there's this kind of whole mysterious thing, which is you kind of have to wait until the end of the year, and then there's bonus day, and then you kind of just have to see how much they're going to pay you.
That's weird that you wouldn't know that.
Well, knowing now, I sort of tried to. There's this weird kind of almost like quasi-religious thing in the bank, which is kind of trained into you. A couple of things are trained into you when you go in. Never speak to the media, never speak to the press, and never tell anyone your bonus. These are things that you should never do. And a lot of people genuinely believed if you were discovered having told someone your bonus, you'd be fired.
You don't tell other people at CitiBank about your bonus or outside of CitiBank?
Well, I mean,
you don't
none
tell,
of this
you,
was
you
ever
don't tell your
explicit,
parents.
So definitely nobody in the bank. But I guess you could probably tell someone outside of the bank if you knew it wouldn't get back.
Right.
But it was weird. Nobody really, because it was never explicit. And I think in hindsight, it wasn't. I mean, I'm pretty certain it wasn't illegal to say what your bonus was.
Doesn't CitiBank want you to compete with other traders?
Well, they want you to compete on other traders to make the most P&L.
Right.
But they don't want you to compete with other traders on getting, because they don't want to pay you, right? They want to pay you down. So there's this big story in the first year of my first year trading where my boss quit, and he's the guy who hired me. He's the guy who ran the trading game. He quit, and I was quite disappointed because he was kind of my big sponsor in the bank. And he took me out for lunch and he said, look, I'm sorry for quitting, but you can ask me any question you want and I'll tell you the answer. And I said to him, what do I have to do to get paid £100,000 this year? And he was like, oh, there's no way. You can't make £100,000 in your first year. For me, £100,000 was like the biggest number I could think of, basically, £100,000. And I was like, just tell me what I need to do. Mm-hmm. He goes, you need to make CitiBank $10 million. That's what you have to do, $10 million. And I was like, all right, okay. Went back to the desk and I was making all these plans. How can I make CitiBank $10 million, $10 million? And I managed to do it. I got my head down. First year trader, 22, 23, $12 million I made for the bank. My new boss came in, showed me my bonus. It was £395,000. And I'm pretty sure the previous boss, if he'd still been there, would have paid me just over 100. Because they don't want you to know what you should be being paid, right? Because then they can underpay you.
Huh.
So I think that's kind of what they were trying to do.
So basically, I mean, you said before that you were the best trader.
In 2011,
exactly.
I was the top trader in
But
the
you
bank.
don't know if you got the highest bonus.
No, there's no way I could ever know that. Yeah, there's no way I could know that.
That's weird.
Yeah, and it's quite possible that I didn't.
So, concerning like that you were lending money to people or institutions, explain to people like it's the bank's money, and you are allowed to.
Yeah, well, this is quite complicated.
Just lend it and give it away. I mean,
well, so as a trader, most traders are expected to fund themselves from the market.
okay.
Yeah, so say in the previous example where I have agreed to lend you your €1 million in a year's time, I can wait for a year because I don't need to give it to you for a year. But when that year comes up and I need to give you the money, I need to actually find someone to borrow it from. So I'm lending you the bank's money, but I need to get it myself from somewhere else. And this is how most traders work. Yeah, it's actually you need to fund everything yourself. So I'm trying to find somebody to borrow from and somebody to lend from, basically, at different times.
Doesn't sound too complicated.
It's not complicated once you understand what you're doing, but you do a lot of trades, it can get complicated.
I think I want to become a trader now.
So I would walk in every day.
I'm going to quit journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would walk in every day and you open your screen and it will tell you, like, today you need to go out and get $5 billion because that's how much you owe today. Yeah. And I actually have this recurring dream, which is I've forgotten to get my $5 billion.
Billion. That's amazing.
But that's what it would be. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't always be 5 billion. Sometimes it would be lower, you know. But
right.
Yeah, you have to come in. You have to get your $5 billion. So I need to find someone telling me $5 billion. Yeah, every day you'd have your number. Yeah,
and that's what you've been doing. That's what you were doing all day, every day, just like lending money, borrowing money.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Early on, I was doing a lot. Later on, like I just started to sort of put big bets on for like the future and just wait. I got a bit tired of the kind of dicking around in and out, borrow and lend.
Did you ever lose a lot of money?
Yeah, so there's one story in the book. In my second full year trading in 2010, at the time, like American banks, well, everybody in that area was making a lot of money by agreeing to lend a lot of dollars. And you had to borrow some other currency against it. And I became the Swiss franc trader. And I had borrowed a lot of Swiss francs and lent a lot of dollars. And, you know, just before 2011, everybody was buying these Swiss francs because it was like a safe haven, right? Still happens now. And the Swiss National Bank was like really worried that the Swiss franc was appreciating and it was going to cause problems for the Swiss economy because everything was becoming too expensive, their exports becoming not competitive. So they did this. They were trying to find ways to make the Swiss franc cheaper. And at one point, they did this experiment, which was to suddenly intervene in specifically the product I was trading, which was Swiss foreign exchange swaps, and lend Swiss francs in that product for an unbelievably low interest rate, like minus 4.5%. And I had all these Swiss francs that suddenly I couldn't get anything more than minus 4.5% on. And I lost immediately about $2 million immediately. And I kind of did this thing which I've criticised in the past, which I like fixated on the maths. I was like, there's no way they're going to keep interest rates at -4.5%. Because there's a problem, right? Like, if the Swiss National Bank charged the Swiss banks -4.5%, then the Swiss banks are going to try and charge Swiss people -4.5%. And then people will take their money out of the bank because you can just hold the cash and get zero, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, there's no way they're going to maintain it. So I started to borrow more. And like the next day I lost another $500,000. And the next day I lost another $2 million. And I was convinced eventually the Swiss National Bank will back out of this experiment and rates will go back up to zero, which is what they had been before. And I was right, but within a week I lost $8 million. And my boss stopped me out of the position, which means he says, look, you have to stop this bet. You have to take the loss on it. And that's, to this day, the only significant big loss I ever made as a trader.
So your higher-ups are watching your trades. Like
they only watch if you lose.
Really?
Only watch if you well, I mean, I can't speak for now, but yeah, I've been out of it for 10 years. But if you're losing, there's this. So everybody can see your P&L for the year, and if it drops below zero, then it starts appearing on the spreadsheet as a red number in brackets.
Okay.
And we would call that being in the red. And if you're in the red, if you're like considered a financial loss for the year, then definitely your higher ups will be looking.
Were you a greedy person? A greedy trader?
That is a good question. Because, I made $12 million in my first like full year trading, which was a lot, and which is a crazy amount for a first year trader. And I was only able to do that because I was like, I'm going to take it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the money. And then immediately my next plan was like, I want to be CitiBank's like top trader. I want to make like loads. And I went on to become #1 trader 2 years later, 2011. But then if you go and look at my personal life at the time, I wasn't spending any of it. Somebody asked me once, what did you like? What is the biggest thing you bought? And I bought a black Vespa for £3,000, which for me, because I grew up so poor, £3,000 was a lot of money. But that year I made like $2 million. So it's obviously not that much. And I didn't spend any of it. So in that sense, I was never really particularly materially greedy. I was kind of like greedy in the abstract. Like I was trying to make loads of money.
Exactly.
But there was never really any plan for what I would do with the money. Yeah, so it's kind of a complicated question. Was I greedy? I don't really know, to be honest. I think...
But isn't that the problem with greed, that you just want to have more?
I mean, this is the problem with money, More. One of my friends came out to my house the other day and we were talking about that period of time when I was making a lot of money. And I bought a car. And I bought the car from my mate. It was a silver Peugeot 106. And I bought it from my mate for £710 is what I paid for it. And I went to pick my mate up, another mate. And he was like, why are you driving this like shit car? And I said to him like, look, if I buy myself a £100,000 car, some guy pulls up next to me in a £200,000 car, I'm a dickhead. But if I'm in this car and a guy pulls up in a £200,000 car, he's a dickhead. Mm-hmm. Because once you start playing that game, there's like, you look at somebody like Elon Musk, he's the richest man in the world. He's obsessed with getting richer. And I think this is, a big part of the story of the book. We talk about like the religious nature of money is what does it do to people? What does it do to a society when they become obsessed with money? Because money at the end of the day is just a number, but it's a very powerful number, right? And it's a hypnotizing number.
Yeah, I was asking you personally because in the book you write about a scene with your girlfriend, and she's like, she said like, you've got enough. Why don't you just leave? And you write. She was wrong there. It's never enough. I'd never leave. Not if it meant letting them win.
Yeah.
This sounds like you were a greedy person.
It's complicated, to be honest.
Isn't that greed in of itself? Like, because it's never enough.
I mean, in the end, I did leave. Right. But I think at that point, I was trying to leave. So this is like towards the end of the book. I was trying to leave, and the management at the bank were absolutely adamant that they were going to force me to stay. And it becomes like quite a nasty fight. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend, my mental health was terrible. I lost a ton of weight. I was down to 8 stone, which I can't work out in kilograms, but very, very skinny, like a skeleton. I've seen some photos of me at the time. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend, very sensibly, was like, why the fuck are you doing this to yourself? Because I decided they were going to fight me for the money. And I decided I was going to fight them for the money as well. And she was just like, why the fuck? Obviously, just in a very like sensible human way. She was like, this is bad for you. Like you should quit. But I decided immediately, like, no, I'm just not going to let these fuckers beat me. So I think all throughout it, really, there's this question of like, is it actually about the money, or is it about like the game? And I think it's about it's obsession with the game, in a way. I just
the game of trading.
Yeah, but and it's easy to look at that and criticize that, and the book is a sense of criticism of that way of being. But I sometimes wonder why all the rich people out there in the world who don't need any more money, so few of them do the work I'm doing,
right?
Which is come out and try and fight against an unfair economic system. And I think in a way, the drive that pushes me to fight against this fucked up economic system is the same drive that pushed me to fight CitiBank even when it was killing me. I think maybe I'm just that kind of guy.
I mean, you call it a game, but I'm sure many people would tell Hans in the chat that sounds more like gambling. And maybe you were addicted. You were like it was an addiction. Like
well, it's funny because
it's a gambling addiction.
So a lot of traders,
all this trading.
Yeah, well, a lot of traders also have gambling addictions in the sense that they're gambling compulsively on horse racing or sports betting or things like that. Mm-hmm. And I never got involved in that.
But trading is betting as well.
Yeah, trading is a form of betting as well.
So it's gambling. It's another form of gambling, just not sports gambling.
Yeah, I mean, it is gambling, but then I don't gamble in other ways. I think...
But you were gambling at CitiBank, for CitiBank.
Yeah, and for myself.
Right,
but
because you were addicted.
But I mean, if it was a gambling addiction, then I would probably have been gambling in other areas. I think for me, there was an addiction, but I don't think the addiction was so much to gambling. I think it was...
I mean, you can be like... I know people who have a gambling addiction, but they're only like a single kind of game gambling.
To be honest, I think it was more closer to a more classic workaholic addiction, which is very common, which is people who are absolutely obsessed with being the best in their field of work. You'll see people in law, I'm sure you'll see people in media that are just absolutely unhealthily obsessed with being the best at the thing that they do. And then, it's very easy when you're making a lot of money to be like, this is a good thing. It's a good thing to be obsessed with my work.
What role did, back to greed.
Yeah.
What role did greed play on the trading floor? Like with other traders or with your higher ups? Like, were they counting on greed?
I think that the traders were probably more motivated by envy and by insecurity.
Envy?
Than by greed, I would say.
Why?
If I look at them, because they all had a lot of money. They all had enough money. They didn't need more money. So what drove them to... Like, what drives Elon Musk? Is it greed or is it envy? Because there is no way he could ever spend anything like the money that he has. Mm-hmm. But he drives to get more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually... It's a lust for power and it's a fight to beat others. I think that's what they reach. There's another trader in the book. In the book, he's called Caleb. He's my boss. Mm-hmm. And he quits. He's this guy who I asked, what do I do to make £100,000? Mm-hmm. And he goes and he builds he made a ton of money. And he went to build this beautiful house in Northern California. And he had his family there. And it was kind of an inspiration for me because I thought there's a guy who did it, came in, made his money, didn't lose his humanity and got out. Mm-hmm. And then 3 years later, he comes back. And I really wanted to understand why he came back. And I tried to ask him about it one day, and I was asking him, why? I couldn't say, why did you come back? Because that would have been disrespectful. So I just said, what was it like in California? And he said to me, it's beautiful. We had this beautiful house with this huge garden. The kids were playing in the garden. It was amazing. And I was kind of pushing him on it to try and understand why I came back. And he said, there was this one problem, which was that the thermostat was in the wrong place in the house. And he said, when the fire came on, it would trip the thermostat and the thermostat would turn off. And I just had this image of this guy who used to be like one of the top traders, sitting in this beautiful house with his beautiful family, just staring at the thermostat, thinking, I've got to get fucking back on the trading floor. And I think this is, for me, it's a story of what happens when you train men to believe that their value to society and to their families is competition and being better than others. I think for me, it's kind of the logical, psychological endpoint of competition as the root value of a man.
But it doesn't sound healthy, though.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was. And, you know, you'll see in the book what happened to me and you see what happened to the other traders around me. And
that's why I was talking about an addiction. And
yeah, no, I think it's an addiction. It's an addiction to... But I don't think it's...
And it's an addiction that kind of hurts our society in a way.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's the story. That's the story of the book. That's the story of the book. And I think one of the things that's so funny about this is, so some of the guys who consider themselves to be the characters in the book, I need to be careful what I say, they came out and they attacked the book. And what they said was, Gary wasn't the best trader.
Oh.
And I think there's something like so beautiful about that. Because you write a book saying like, we were obsessed with competition and it's destroying ourselves and society. And people from the trading floor come out and say, you weren't the best trader. It shows you like, this is Elon Musk, this is Jeff Bezos. Why do they do it? Why do you do it? Why are you a billionaire and you devote all of your time to getting richer? It's a mode of masculinity which I think we celebrate in our society. That's what we tell our young men. We say to them, get rich or die trying.
Greed is good.
We say to them, if you're not rich, you're nothing. If you're a failure, you know what I mean? And then this is kind of, in a sense, this is the end point of kind of ideas about individuality and liberalism that go back hundreds of years. I think this is kind of the end point that we get to, which is you train people to be selfish, to be greedy, to try and win, to try and win, to try and win. And you end up in this very cruel society that gives poverty to most people.
You were talking about your colleagues and other traders. It sounds like they were all male. Like, were there female traders at CitiBank, for example?
There were very, very few. There were.
So it also sounds like a male.
Oh, it's a very, very, very male space. People sometimes ask me, like, have you seen this show Industry?
Yes, HBO.
People ask me, like, have you watched it? And I did try and watch it as, like, research for my book. And I watched the first 2 episodes and I couldn't watch any more. Because there was so much sex in the first 2 episodes. I worked for 10 years. I never worked with a woman. It's just so like absurd. But it's just an unbelievably masculine space. And it's the whole thing is based on this kind of masculine competitive energy. And most female traders, I think, probably felt pressured to kind of conform to this way of being, to be more masculine. A little bit like how Margaret Thatcher started to talk like really deep like a man. I think that was the space.
I just imagine, like, you probably know Wolf of Wall Street, the movie.
Yeah.
Like, these kind of scenes at your bank, like you being the Wolf of Citibank, and be like, yeah.
There were a lot of scenes like
best.
this. Yeah, there were a lot of scenes like this.
I'm
But
the
there's
best.
also one thing I wanted to capture in the book was beneath that competition and masculinity, this kind of sadness and vulnerability, which I think almost always comes underneath that. Because I don't think a person who's worth $10 million and is like stable and happy works 100-hour week for money. But these guys do that, and it raises this question as to why. Why do we do that? Why are we so obsessed with making more money? Why are they so obsessed with making more money? How have we come to this place as a society? And I wanted to kind of show, I think actually this is one of the reasons why quite a lot of people in finance really hate the book, is because if you write a book about finance and you portray these guys as like maniacs who take drugs and sleep with prostitutes and are wild, they kind of fucking love that because it kind of like supports their like the sort of rock star self-image that they have. But if you portray them as actually kind of deeply wounded and sad and a little pathetic, it kind of drives them a little bit crazy, which I quite enjoy, if I'm honest.
Do you ever worry about job security?
When I was there?
Yeah.
No, never. Well, I say that.
Because you thought you're the best, so...
Well, obviously, in my second year, I lost $8 million in a week. So in my first year, I made for the bank $12 million, which is very good. I think it's the best ever for a first-year trader there. Second year, I made 4, and then I lost 8, which put me $4 million in the red. And that would have been 2010, so I'd have been 23. So to be 23 and $4 million in the red, in hindsight, I must have thought, fuck, what if I lose my job? But I'm not sure I ever did think that. Honestly, like, I was so... I'm the kind of person, like, if you put a computer game in front of me, I'll wake up 2 months later. You know what I mean? I'm the kind of person that gets so obsessed in a game that all I want to do is master that game and figure that game out. So when I was down $4 million, I was obsessed with make more money. And then this 2011, I was a top trader, get paid $2 million. I bought a flat and I ripped all the furniture out of the flat, and I was supposed to redecorate the flat, but I didn't. I just put a bed there and a TV there, and there was bare concrete floors. And it's because all I cared about was this game. It's just obsession with game, basically, is what happened to me. So did I ever think about losing the job? I don't think so.
I mean, at some point you must have met women.
In my life, yeah.
And you got a girlfriend.
Yeah.
How did you explain to her what you do and what kind of person you are? That you're like a legal addict in a way.
Yeah, so I mean, I had a couple of girlfriends while I was working in the bank. And one of them was...
Like, did you tell your parents as well? Like,
no, I never. I've never, to this day, I've never told my parents, but they must know. I assume.
Well,
yeah. Probably they know.
Hi, Mrs. Stevenson.
The first girlfriend I had when I was working in the bank, she was, in a way, she was a similar kind of person. She worked in fashion, but she was also obsessed with being the best. And I think it's important to point that out, that this obsession with being the best and with competition, it's not isolated to men in our society. No. Women also, a lot of women work in extremely competitive industries where they're also obsessed with being the best. So she was kind of the same. Then I dated another girl a couple of years later who was just totally different. She wasn't really bothered with that at all. And she could tell instantly that I hated the job, which was really quite weird to me because I hadn't realised myself that I hated the job. And she was constantly like, why the fuck do you do that job? You hate it. Why don't you just quit it? And it was crazy to me because, you grow up in London. Where I grew up, it felt when I was a kid, like everybody was obsessed with success and money and being their best. And that was your job. That was almost your responsibility as a human, is to be a success, to make money, to win. And then when I started dating that girl, it was in 2011, which is when I was the top trader in the bank. She didn't give a shit. And she was like, what are you doing? Why don't you fucking quit? And it was crazy. And I think I was kind of pissed off, actually, in a way. And I remember there's one scene in the book which happened to me in real life, which is I made my big bonus that year. And I came home and it's $2 million and I'm trying to work out how to invest this money, and I'm in my office, which is in the corner of my living room. She came in and I could see straight away in her eyes, she could see I was stressed. And I was kind of fucking pissed, like, why? And she came in and was like, what's wrong? And I was like, look, I'm busy, I've got to invest my money. And she said to me, if I just made as much money as you just made, the last thing I'd be doing is sitting in the corner of my living room stressing the fuck out.
Exactly. I'd be happy.
And I think I put in the book, I realised straight away she was right. And I really fucking hated her for that. I think that's how I wrote it in the book. Maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it was hard because you work so hard to have this success. You know what I mean? And then as soon as I started dating the girl who didn't care about it, it kind of made me realise how fucking stupid it was. But the thing is, it's not stupid because at the same time, that money is financial security for my life. I wouldn't be able to do the work I do now if it wasn't for that money. And if my brother needed help buying a house, I helped him. My sister needs help, I'm going to help her. You know what I mean? But it was really healthy for me to have somebody in there who just said, like, listen, it's just a fucking number. Like, walk away from it.
We were talking about earlier about, Mormonism and your university and all this being a cult.
Yeah.
Like from a layman perspective, this kind of sounds like a cult. Investment banking.
No,
trading.
100% it is. 100% it is. And then more recently, I dated a girl who worked for Goldman Sachs, and that was insane, like the cult of the cults. But it's the thing is, it's not just about the trading floor. This is our society. We've built a society that is, to some degree, a cult of money and power.
Yeah.
That's what we've built. It's not just the investment banks they are the modern temples. You know, I lived in Japan for a bit, and you go to like the old capitals of Japan, like Kyoto, like Nara, and you see the big buildings that they built back then were these huge Buddhist temples, these religious temples. What are the big buildings we build now? They're banks. They're massive fucking skyscrapers for banks, right? That's what we build now. And I think if you judge our society on that, when I was a kid, you know, I used to look up at these skyscrapers. There's a scene in the book where I'm sitting on the top of the tallest building in Ilford with my mate, watching these skyscrapers go up in the distance, saying, like, I'm going to work there one day. Yeah, this is what we've made our societies. And I don't think you can point at young kids and blame them when they say, I want to be rich, I want to be a banker, because that's the story that we sell to them.
Don't hate the players.
Yeah, I try my best not to.
Hate the game.
Exactly.
But how can we as a society, I mean, we were talking about inequality earlier.
Yeah.
What can society democratically do against these fucking cults?
You know, I've got a YouTube channel.
Let's abolish investment banking.
It's not about investment banking, right? I've got a YouTube channel now where I try to explain to people that if you don't deal with growing inequality, economically our society will collapse into poverty. And I 100% believe that's true. I bet on it. I make a lot of money on it. My predictions have been good. My forecasts have been good. The number one comment I get by that on my YouTube channel, by a million miles, is, Gary, tell me how to make money. And, you know, you laugh and it is funny, but, you know, I grew up in poverty and
I get why.
I understand that 100%.
Yeah.
And I think we have put our young people in this kind of horrible situation where they are basically told, if you don't make money, you're a failure. And we're increasingly creating an economy which makes it basically impossible for them to make any kind of realistic money. So it's a mental health disaster, right? You put people in the game and you tell them you have to win this game, and we make the game impossible for them to win. And then, of course, they become obsessed. Of course, if I tell you, unless you get this thing, your whole life will be a failure, and I make this whole big puzzle maze around you that kind of pretends to offer you options, ways to get this thing, but none of them work, you'll go mad. You'll keep chasing around trying to find it. So I think one thing we need to do is we need to tell more realistic stories to ourselves and to our young people about the world as it is, which is, realistically, we live in a world where almost everybody ends up exactly where their parents were in the social hierarchy. There's very little social mobility nowadays. And that means if you grow up poor or ordinary, because you have this increasing inequality, if you grow up in the middle or towards the bottom, you'll probably be poorer than your parents. That's the truth. That's the reality. Anyone below the sort of 70th percentile, you're going to be poorer than your parents. And that's not your fault. That's the society that we've built. Because what we have now, and I see this in my friends, people from poor backgrounds, they work fucking hard and they struggle to pay the bills. Buying a house is an unaffordable dream. They can't realistically afford a family with any sort of comfort or quality of life. And they look at themselves and they say, I'm a fucking failure. But they had no chance from the beginning. So we need to tell those people, if you're able to just support yourself, support a family, put food on the table, you should be fucking proud of that, because we've made that very difficult for you. Because until we can be honest to people about where they are, then they're going to be filled with shame, they're going to be filled with fear. And this is the kind of emotion that the far right preys on. It's this fear and shame that we give our kids.
But I want to get back to my question. I mean, you said Goldman Sachs, other investment banks, they are the temples.
Yeah.
The cult of money. And these are the temples. And we got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
How do we fight those temples? I mean, I was kind of joking, like abolishing Goldman Sachs and other investment banks.
I don't think the banks themselves are the problem. I think the banks are a symptom of the problem, personally. That's my belief.
But You can fight symptoms.
You can fight symptoms, but only so long. You know what I mean? If you've got cancer and you keep fighting the symptoms, but you don't fight the cause, it's only going to last you so long. You know, I worry a little bit.
I mean, you can't abolish capitalism from one day to another, but you could abolish Goldman Sachs and others. But
I worry a little bit.
How do you put chains on them? Like, I mean, these are fucking dangerous cults. These are poison.
I
to
worry
our
a little bit
society.
that the banks get used as a front for the rich, which has been happening for hundreds of years in Europe. Really, at the end of the day, look, I've written a story about it. I've written a book. You can read it. There's a lot of dicks in these banks, but they're not all dicks. At the end of the day, they're ordinary people. Most ordinary people, if you gave them the chance of a job where they could get paid 1-2 million euros a year, they would take it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the problem is the bankers. I think the problem is the system of inequality.
Oh.
What is the bank? What is the bank? The bank is just the bankers. You know, this is, okay, look, there are some dickheads in the banks. You know, you read the book, it's full of them. But you come to me, the thing is, you go for the banks, right? I don't know like what your childhood was like when you grew up, right? I grew up fucking poor. And I did my homework lying on the floor on a wooden board. And nobody came and helped me. The welfare state didn't come and help me. The left didn't come and help me. The charities didn't come and help me. The people that brought me out of poverty were the fucking banks on the horizon. And if you go after the banks without giving the kids in your cities a way out, they will not thank you. You need to give those kids a way out of poverty. And I don't think, some people might be surprised to hear me say this. And you know, this is not me saying that I think the banks are fucking saints or fucking heroes. I don't think, listen, if you're on the Titanic and it's going down, what do you want to do? Do you want to find out who fucking sunk it? No, you don't. You want to save as many fucking people as you can. You know what I mean? I think we can decide who the villains were afterwards. At the moment, the economy is going to get worse and worse and worse year after year. And if people like you and me don't pull our socks up, the far right will get into power.
But we can, as you said earlier, like there's chaos is coming if we don't change the entire system, and chaos will come, and we maybe should be clear on what kind of mistakes to avoid after the chaos in a new system.
Yeah.
And since we've been talking about a fucking greedy cult in the last hour, about what you've done, maybe we should talk about how we can avoid this greedy cult.
I think you need to stop the inequality from happening. You need to manage inequality in your society.
So if we fight inequality, we get rid of these cults of traders?
Listen, I lived in Japan for 2 years, okay? And Japan is a country which does not have this cult of certain people making £2-3 million a year. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in London, where if you fuck up and you don't get a good job, then you can't feed your fucking kids. And if you do well and you get the right job, you get paid £2-3 million a year. And that makes people look at each other and think, who's going to make it? Mm-hmm. Am I going to make it, or are you going to make it? And I don't want to give the impression that Japan is a perfect society, but in a country which doesn't split people and say, you guys are going to starve to death and you guys are going to be millionaires, mm-hmm. you don't have this obsession with money to the same degree. And look, Japan is becoming more unequal and it's having a lot of the same problems as other parts of the world. But I think it is the inequality that causes this cult of money. And I think you need to deal with that. And, you know, my parents' generation, where ordinary people were able to support families, you know, they didn't have that same obsession with money. I think it's the inequality that is at the root of it. And I think that is what you need to fight.
I mean, we've been talking about now for 2.5 hours. We don't have all the time in the world, so make sure to get your questions in for Hans. He's coming up soon. I have a few questions left.
Okay.
Are you still?
Yeah.
Are you still fit? In your original book, and this is like the German book, Das Milliardenspiel, the original book in Britain is called The Trading Game.
Yeah.
A Confession.
Yeah.
And I was reading the book, and I was waiting for your confession.
Yeah, so I have to be honest about this.
Why do you have to confess?
The publishers added a confession, basically.
Oh.
So nowadays, apparently, all nonfiction has a subtitle. And they were like, we want it to be a confession. And I was like, I hate it. But I think the reason they did that is because, so you've read the book, right? Mm-hmm. The book is very personal. It's very story-driven. The first line of the book is, I want to tell you a story. It's very character-driven. It's quite emotional. You know, I wanted it to be funny. I wanted it to be sad. I wanted it to really feel like a journey that you came on with me. And if you just call the book The Trading Game, people are going to think it's like a manual on how to trade. So I think they wanted something, and I wanted something as well, to convey to the readers, this is not a manual on how to trade. This is a story, and it's an emotion-driven story. And they felt that a confession did that.
So you don't have to confess anything?
I think it raises...
Make amends?
I think when you call it a confession, it does raise some quite interesting questions about morality and about whether it was wrong, whether I did something that was wrong, whether I'm culpable. So I think it raises some interesting questions. Obviously, I've got my own opinions about that. But do you think I've got something to apologise for?
I'll leave that up to our listeners. I mean, we've been talking about...
They can read the book and find out.
I mean, Hans can tell us what our audience was thinking about. Hans, if there are any things the audience needs, Gary needs to confess, let us know. How did you heal from your addiction?
I think it's a journey, isn't it? You know, you come out, I think you have to recognise that I was fucking young in the story. I'm in my early 20s here, and I kind of got sucked into a thing. It was difficult, to be honest. You know, I come out, and it was hard at first. You know, at my peak of my trading, I was trading fucking nearly $1 trillion a day in terms of volume. It was crazy. And then I tried to leave. The bank made it very difficult for me to leave. This kind of mad thing happened where I got moved to Japan. I tried to quit. The bank didn't let me quit. And it meant that I got kind of stuck for like 18 months, just kind of wandering around Japan, like eating ramen in the middle of the night because I couldn't work, but they wouldn't let me leave.
How can they not let you leave? I mean,
well, it's complicated. I mean, that is explained basically in the first scene of the book, basically, where my boss kind of...
But I'm asking for the audience, of course.
Yeah, so the boss... I said I wanted to leave and work for a charity that was going to work in inequality. And my boss didn't want me to do that. He took me out to... And this is the guy, Caleb, who's mentioned earlier on in it. He took me out to a ramen restaurant. And he basically said, like, I want to tell you a story about this young trader who used to work for Deutsche Bank. Really good young trader, made a lot of money for Deutsche Bank, a lot of money for himself. But, you know, he had one little problem, which is that he wanted to leave. And, you know, the bank didn't want him to leave, so they looked through his stuff, they looked through all of his shit, you know, they looked through his emails, they looked through his trades. And
cults never want you to leave.
There wasn't really anything that bad in there, but there was enough to take him to court, and it rumbled through court for years and years and years until he was bankrupted. And then he said to me, I like you, Gary. I think you're a good person, but sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I think it was pretty clear that he was making a threat to me, that I'd be sued if I tried to leave. And that sort of starts the kind of closing chapter of the book, which is this. I think when you hear that story, maybe you can kind of understand why I was like, fuck these guys, I'm not going to let them win. Yeah. Yeah. And that was...
But explain why they wouldn't let you leave, because you were such a great trader. You were making so much money for them?
I would have to kind of theorize, because they never tell... I mean, okay, so the one obvious thing is, yeah, you're a great trader, you don't want you to leave, they want you to make money for them. I think probably there was an element of them thinking if they came in really hard, it might scare me into not quitting. Because, you know, it's hard enough to walk away from the money as it is. So maybe they're thinking if we give him a punch, he'll come back into line. I think there's maybe also a part of it, which was like, you know, these guys, bank senior management, they're very, very wealthy people who were young ones. They were young and they had dreams, they had hopes for the future. And now they're old and they're tired and they're rich, and some part of them knows they fucked it up, you know? Some part of them knows it shouldn't be like this. You shouldn't just be 45 years old, slaving away in some job you fucking hate for money to give it to a wife and kids that you hate and don't want to see. They know that. And I think to see me come in, make the money, and 26 years old say, you know what, I'm out. I think some part of that made them go a bit mad. to be honest.
I mean, I was asking about your healing process because, like, you mentioned your former boss who came back 3 years later. Kind of reminded me of an alcoholic. Who stopped drinking, went dry, and then then he started having a drink again, and he became an alcoholic again.
You know, the funny thing is, I didn't trade for a couple of years when I came out. I didn't trade, and I was trying to find like how can we do something about inequality, blah blah. And I went back to university. I went to Oxford for 2 years.
Right.
And I was sitting in the back row of a fucking boring econometrics lecture in like DEC 2017, and I was so bored. I just started like looking at the market, which is something that I always do kind of compulsively. And I saw again, the markets had started to bet on a recovery in interest rates, recovery in the economy. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, again, you're doing this again. And I thought, fuck it, I opened up a trading account and I put a bet on that rates would stay zero. And that bet was right. And I made like a decent bit of money and I got some friends in. And then I didn't bet again until COVID came in. And then at the beginning of COVID, it was really obvious to anyone who bothered to do the analysis, which was basically nobody, there would be a massive increase in inequality. Mm-hmm. That government stimulus would end up being accumulated by the richest people in society. And it was obvious to me very quickly that asset prices would increase a lot. And there was one day early on in the crisis where people panicked so much that the gold price collapsed. And I just thought, oh my God, it's so fucking easy. And I opened up the trading account and I put £1 million on gold price to go up. I think at 1460, 1470. It's more than 2,800 now. So I still do trade in a way. But I think weirdly, once I started to trade again, I kind of felt better. And it was that trade, it was immediately after I put that trade on that I published my first ever article. Because the thing is,
so you're functioning
trading
addict.
Is how...
You're functioning addict.
Trading is how I understand the economy.
Huh.
I can't understand the economy without trading. For me, like you want to know what the weather is, you check the weather forecast, right? Mm. For me, when you've been a trader, you don't read the fucking Financial Times. You know it's bullshit. You know that the markets are there and that will tell you what's happening. So you need to be in it. But I don't know, and it's strange, right? Because I've gone back into trading and then I went back into journalism and I wrote this book. And the book has kind of taken me back in many ways into the same space I was as a trader, right? Because the book is in large part about the dangers of obsession, the dangers of addiction. And yet I spent a year locked in my bedroom writing it, convinced I was going to write a #1 bestseller. And I did. So it's complicated. And I suppose it's that thing, because it's that madness that makes me push myself to extremes. That is also what I'm using to fight the system. So I don't know whether that means I'm cured or whether it means I'm not. But at least I know now that I'm trying to use my abilities to stop the world from collapsing. And that makes me feel better. On some days.
It feels like you're a functioning addict. I'm sure there are people who watch this or read your book or follow your stuff who want to be a trader themselves. Young men, mostly. How can they avoid being, trapped like you in this system? How can they avoid not... how can they avoid the dark sides?
There's two things, right? Because nowadays a lot of people, especially a lot of young men, are doing like trading at home on their laptops, like not professional traders. I would really strongly advise against doing that, especially it's anything high frequency, anything where you're trading a number of times, multiple times a day. I only trade, I don't really do trades. I just have a massive position and it runs. If you're trading multiple times a day, multiple times a week, probably multiple times a month, you're going to lose money doing that. Stay away from it. It's basically roulette. And some people won't like that because they see it as their path out of poverty. It's a super dangerous game. Most people lose money. Stay away from it. With regards to trading professionally for a bank, it's hard, because the truth is very few people do leave. Once you're in, once you know what it's like to make $1 million a year, you don't want to be making $50,000 a year. You know what I mean? And it's hard to leave, and it's very easy to marry somebody who married you because you're rich and have kids who are going to private schools, and it's very easy to get into that habit. How do you avoid it? How do you avoid it? I guess keep your real friends and family close. Hopefully you've got some people that keep your feet on the ground. But it's hard, because we live in a society that idolizes money.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make yourself immune to that? I don't know. I guess you've got to look yourself long and hard in the mirror every day and ask yourself, is this the way it should be? Maybe that will help.
I mean, you were talking about people who trade at home.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of reminds me of the crypto, the Bitcoin stuff.
Yeah.
People, isn't that a kind of a trading scheme as well?
Honestly, I think it's just a pyramid scheme. And I know I'll get attacked on the internet for that. Look, a bunch of extremely wealthy people in California make coins for free. It's costless for them. And they sell them to you for like $20,000. And a load of money is flowing from young men across the world to these San Francisco billionaires. I'm actively short crypto. I think the price will fall. I think the price collapse to zero. I think it will be looked back on as similar to the tulip bubble, as a crazy financial mania. But if you really, really have to do it, any crypto that you want to buy and own, ask yourself how you would feel if it fell to zero. And if you're not willing to take that, don't do it.
But it's kind of amazing that people are into this.
It's not amazing because
it's not amazing.
We live in a world that tells young men, if you don't make money, you're a fucking failure, and gives them absolutely no realistic chance of making money. And here comes these guys with this scheme where they say, if you buy into this, we'll make you a millionaire. And some people have legitimately been made millionaires by it. So it's not a surprise at all. Like in a world where work doesn't work, people are going to look for ways to make money, and it's sold as a way to make money, and obviously there's a massive demand for that.
I mean, these people, it reminds me of interest rates and central banks.
Yeah.
Oh, crypto, Bitcoin, there's no government who sets interest rates and gives out money. It's decentralized.
There's no such thing as...
It's democratic.
But it's not democratic,
Great.
because Bitcoin is dominated by whoever owns the most Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not have a democratic monetary system, then you have a power-based monetary system where whoever has the most money has the most power. It's not democratic. Of course it's not democratic. There's no votes. It's not, in the absence of democracy is like
Anarchy.
Strength of force.
Yeah.
And, if I'm out there and I own 60% of the Bitcoin, then I fucking dominate Bitcoin. Simple as that.
Final two questions on inequality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Bernie Sanders was sitting on your table here last year, actually, and he reiterated. He said over and over again, billionaires should not exist.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking about billionaires basically.
Yeah.
Do you think billionaires should not exist?
To be honest, yes. And I'm not against people making money. I want people to be able to make money, to get rich, to achieve financial security. £1 billion, euros, dollars is a lot of fucking money. If you've got €1 billion, you're going to make passive income 50 million euros a year, 1 million euros a week. Mm-hmm. That power will snowball and centralize and accumulate. If you allow a small number of individuals to be unbelievably powerful, history shows us they will generally use that power to take the rest of the power. And that is what's happening now. You need to manage your centralization of power, and I think $1 billion is too much.
How do you do that? How do you not make billionaires exist?
Taxes. Realistically, once somebody has more than £100 million, euros, dollars,
mm-hmm.
we should be charging a massive wealth hoarding tax on anything above that. But why? Nobody needs that. No, and they use that to take the rest of the assets. It has to be taxes. Yeah. And I know people have been brainwashed into thinking when I say tax the billionaires, there's some guy out there making 70,000 euros a year that thinks I'm talking about them. I'm not. The billionaires are the biggest threat to your
I'm going to
future.
be a billionaire once I sell my crypto.
These guys are going to fucking eat you. These billionaires are going to fucking eat the middle class. And I'm here telling you to protect yourself. And the only way to protect yourself is taxes.
Final question from my side. Your answer to everything seems to be wealth distribution, redistribution of wealth. Is that the only answer to a systematic problem? I mean, just by taxing the rich, the power structure, the capitalistic power structure remains. I mean, the rich still own the means of production. They still own the houses they've bought.
Yeah.
How do you?
People think I want to redistribute wealth. I think I'm trying to stop it because the redistribution is happening. It's happening right now.
From the bottom to the top.
From look at what's happened to Western governments, totally bankrupted. The Western middle class losing their homes and going further and further into debt. That wealth is not disappearing. In the last 5 years, we've seen the biggest and fastest ever increase in wealth of millionaires and billionaires across the Western world. The redistribution is happening. Now, look, I would love to live in a less unequal society. Right now, what I'm begging for is we stop driving off the cliff. That's what's going to happen. And once we stop driving off the cliff, we can talk about how do we fix this. If you do not stop that wealth flooding out of the Western middle class, you will lose your Western middle class. And Germany and the UK will look like India, will look like Brazil, will look like South Africa, will look like Nigeria. That is what can happen here. You need to stop the wealth from being lost. You need to protect your wealth. And the only way to do that is taxation.
But where's the cliff? I mean, right now in Germany, there are two families, two men, who own as much wealth as the bottom 42 million Germans. I mean, at some point it'll be only one guy who owns as much as the bottom 42.
Yeah.
Where's the cliff?
The cliff is your kids can't afford the house. Your kids can't afford the family. Your kids have to live. If you want to know what the cliff is, read Charles Dickens. That's the fucking cliff. Go to Mumbai. That's the fucking cliff. Don't tell yourself.
But people don't read Dickens. They don't. 99% don't go to
then we
India.
have to tell them. We have to tell them, listen, poverty existed. Real, serious, can't feed your kids, no future poverty existed here in Germany, in the UK, in the US.
Right.
Serious poverty has existed in our countries. And if we do not protect the wealth of our middle class and our governments, it will happen again.
Gary, this was a lot of fun. Great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You ready for Hans?
Is there any chance I can run really quickly to the bathroom?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. I've been holding it in. I'll be back in 1 second.
Good. Hans, tell me what the audience was thinking. Let's kill some time. Before Gary is back.
No.
Well, no. What did you think about the conversation? Tell me.
It was quite interesting to watch. One of the two persons who were communicating is well known to me in his positions and attitudes, so there wasn't that much of a surprise.
Well,
the more surprising points were his answers and your reaction to his answers. And that also that rose some reactions from the audience then in the chat. But I have to tell that to him, not to you. I'm sorry to say.
I mean, our job, as you know, is to have a interesting conversation and not just let the author, promote his or her book.
Yes.
So, and sometimes you have to provoke the guest, challenge them.
Yes, sure. But to tell the truth, what we do as interviewing journalists, we also, in a way, promote our positions. And when you say it's not our job just to let the guest promote his or her position, we have to be careful that we don't put ourselves too much in the position of promoting our positions, right?
That's why Hans can show you guys how to do it better than me. Hans.
I never said that.
Gary. No, just joking.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi.
Fine. Relieved? Good. That was quite a lively discussion in the chat, in English as well as in German. As you repeatedly said, the solution is tax the rich. Tax the rich. There's a question from one follower of your discussion. It said, well, others would just say expropriate the rich. Is it, why don't you go to that position, which is more radical, expropriate them? You say tax them, which means just let them what they have, but take a bigger share of the cake. Why that?
Well, I suppose to a degree it's a kind of a linguistics discussion in a way. Some would say tax is expropriation. I suppose it depends on the the extent of which you do it. You know, I think that this problem will get worse and worse. And I think inequality will get worse and worse. I think poverty will get worse and worse. So when I think about how do we stop it, there's always like two parallel arguments in my head, which is one, technically what would be the best way to reduce inequality? And two, how do we fucking get it? Because you need to win the battle for hearts and minds. Otherwise, you never get the chance to raise the taxes in the first place. So I'm trying to persuade people that we need to do something on inequality. What I campaign for in the UK is a wealth tax of 1% on wealth of above £10 million. They make 5% a year, right? So if you were to do that, all you would do is slow down the rate at which inequality increases. It wouldn't be enough to reverse it. It wouldn't be enough to stop it. It would only slow it down. And yet, we are not winning that fight. We don't have the wealth tax. We don't look like we're imminently going to get it in any country. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how do we get people on side. And I don't think the word expropriation is going to help us build like a broad coalition of people supportive of this. I think it sounds extreme. It's viewed as extreme. You know, I get enough people calling me a communist as it is without starting to use words like expropriation. I don't consider myself a communist. You know, I'm a classically trained economist. I'm a very successful trader. Yeah, I'm a betting man. I bet on this and I make money on it.
Yeah. How would you define yourself political? Are you aren't conservative?
I like to. If I get to choose, I would say politically, I'm a fucking car mechanic. I've looked at the economy. I'm an economist. There's a problem there of growing wealth inequality. I don't come from a political family. I was not a political person. You know, if you go to your doctor, what's the political persuasion of your doctor? I'm a fucking economist. I'm telling you the problem with the economy. It's not political.
Yeah, right. But decisions about the future of society and the future and the structure of economy is based on political values and political positions and political theories. Yeah. So I think you shouldn't avoid when you say I'm an economist.
I suppose I would call myself a pragmatist. You know, I'm not a massively political person.
If people would call you, well, he sounds like a socialist. Would that be okay?
I mean, it depends. You know, if you talk to someone here in Germany and you ask them what a socialist is, and you talk to somebody in America and you ask them what a socialist is, you're going to get two radically different answers. And, you know, it might be that I'm a socialist by one definition and not by another. I think you just have to be careful, like, putting labels on people because these labels can get demonized. You know what I mean? So then maybe, like, socialists are popular here, but in the US, half the country fucking hates socialists and they think you're fucking Joseph Stalin. You know what I mean? So you have to be careful with what you call yourself, I think.
Okay. There was a question related to what you just said. You know the theory that if taxes for the rich are too high, then the result of a higher tax rate might be less tax revenue because the rich either move themselves physically or they move their money. What's your position on that?
So I think this kind of rests on a little bit of a way of conceptualizing rich people, which is that rich people are like guys with a massive bank account or a massive bag of money. I think it's important to recognize what rich people are. I'm not talking about people who work good jobs and have high salaries. I'm talking about the owners of the assets.
Sure.
What are the assets? The assets are houses, property, land, debt, companies. You know, most of these things exist in the West or sell to the West. You know, if I own 100 German properties, I can leave. The properties are still here. And currently we have a tax system which I think is a little bit absurd, where you allow that rich person to leave, keep 100 German properties, receive the tax on 100 German properties, live technically in the Cayman Islands, pay no tax. That's absurd.
Or in Switzerland.
You cannot allow people to live abroad, own massive chunks of your country, and not pay tax. And it's within our power, within the power of Western nations and governments, to tax the owners of Western assets, whether they live in the West or not.
Is it possible, well, somehow it's an even philosophical question, but not uninteresting. Is it possible to measure greed or envy, These were two basic topics in your discussion.
To measure them, I mean, that is quite a philosophical question. I mean, that was when we were talking about, were these guys motivated by greed? I talk about it right at the beginning of my book, and I talk about love for money. And then I immediately said, like, is it love or is it fear? I'm an economist, but I suppose I'm now an author as well. And I think that a lot of what motivates these very wealthy people to keep going is fear, actually. They're scared. They're scared of falling behind the people around them. They come to be defined by their money, and they're scared that they won't have it anymore. Can you measure it? Probably not.
So would you say they are driven by the whip of fear? Is it something you would accept?
They're not all the same, obviously. But I think in general, I think it's fear, and it's also a kind of an insecurity. Most of these people have an insecurity. Like, there's a character in my book called Rupert who's very sort of rich English background, and it always seemed very clear to me that he desperately wanted the approval of his father. And a lot of people are driven by things like that, or a lot of people, they thought they were not cool, unpopular in high school, and they want to achieve that kind of status that they never had. I think it's often these kinds of insecurities that drive these kinds of people.
You talked about, with Stilo, The Wolf of Wall Street, that book and film, based on the book of Jordan Belfort.
Yeah.
I guess you must have seen the film and must have read the book. Even more, as Jordan Belfort, the author, has a similar biographical background like you have. He came from a poor family. What did you think? Can you remember what you thought when you first read the book or saw the film?
So I have to be honest, I've not read the book. I tried to watch the film, and I got about 30 or 40 minutes in, and I just couldn't watch it because... So, a friend of mine, like a kid who I grew up on my street, he's in the book, and the book is called Harry. He kind of got a job in trading because he knew me. He was younger than me, and his mum passed away, and I was kind of looking after him. He got sucked into the industry, and he starts getting given alcohol, drugs. He was only like a kid, he starts getting exposed to like a lot of horrible stuff, and I saw like what it did to him. And then when I watch movies that kind of show this kind of like alcohol, drugs, hookers, strippers kind of thing, and they make it look like fun, look like a party, I just can't watch it. I can't watch it because I see what it does to people in real life, and it's not a joke, in my opinion.
I'm bringing in a question, which is a question I would have put at the end because it's my question. How much or how do traders and brokers in general who are living in a high-speed, partly artificial, self-created reality, how do you or how do they stimulate themselves? How relevant are drugs and drug-similar things in reality?
So I got expelled from school for selling cannabis when I was 16.
Yes,
and I swore off drugs ever since that. So I never really got involved with it. It's funny, there's one guy, another character in my book called JB in the book, who he's kind of like, I was a close like partner of mine as a trader. And he kind of like had a little bit of a breakdown, and I think he was having problems maybe in his marriage, and I thought he was an alcoholic. It was only many years later that he asked me to meet up and told me that he was spending like 100 or 200,000 pounds a year on cocaine, and I hadn't even known he was doing it. So it's definitely there. I was so young. When I was a kid, none of my mates took cocaine. It was like, I think it's like more of an expensive thing. I didn't really know much about it. And I was wondering how is everybody able to stay out so late when they're working so long? Nowadays, I recognise when someone's on cocaine because they do this thing where they just like talk like loads really quickly at you, and they like really can't recognise at all that they're boring. And now I know that, I look back and I realise probably a lot of people were on it, but I just thought traders are really boring socially. I didn't really recognise it. So, but I don't know because I wasn't doing it. I mean, it's definitely a thing. But to be honest, nowadays, cocaine, you don't need to be a trader to be doing it. Fucking everybody's doing
No,
it.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, I guess, I'm not in that scene. You're the expert. I think it's kind of a high speed. You can't compare it to any regular job. It's kind how to say that? I guess it's like Himalaya mountain climbing in the Himalaya.
People who need to do extreme. People need an
you go
extremes.
to the extreme, and you need kind of a push or motivation.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
It
Is
reminds
true?
me a little bit of, like top footballers who retire
Yeah.
and then fall into a depression because they miss that buzz.
I see.
I guess for me, I got that buzz from the game. And there are other traders, like there's a character, Billy in the book, who is an excellent trader, gets their buzz from the game. But yeah, I think it does attract people who need extremes, I think possibly. But everybody's different. A lot of people do dip themselves in luxury. They want to go to expensive restaurants and, they want to have the most expensive of everything. And that's what does it for them. I think everybody's got their own vice.
A steak with gold glitter on top.
Oh, yeah,
of
that's
it.
the thing nowadays, isn't it? Yeah.
They do that. Coming back to classical questions, your opinion on the MMT, I guess you are more or less positive about that. You talked about Piketty, positive way. Now, comparing, if you compare the MMT to, let's say, Keynesianism or post-Keynesianism, where would you put yourself in this range? Closer to MMT or closer to Keynesianism?
It's hard
or
for me,
somewhere else?
It's hard for me to answer that because, similarly to your question about socialism, different people have really different ideas of what they mean when they say MMT. For example, a lot of people will come in and I'll say we need to tax the rich more. People will sometimes come in and say we don't need to tax the rich more because the government doesn't spend its fund. It doesn't fund from taxes, and in that sense, some people use MMT to argue against taxation of the rich because they think you can just print it, which I think is like really phenomenally dangerous thing to believe. I think COVID shows us what happens when you try to fund enormous amounts of spending essentially from printed money. If nobody keeps a track of where that money ends up, it tends to end up with the rich. But then at the same time, other proponents of MMT will say, no, you really need taxation to manage inequality. So it's hard for me to comment because my strong belief is that unless you tax the rich more, we're in really big trouble. Some people use MMT to say we should tax the rich less, and some people say we should use it to tax the rich more.
So that's your magnetic North Pole, tax the rich, in a way.
If you come to me with cancer, then my magnetic North Pole is cure your cancer. Okay. I'm telling you, I'm a car mechanic here. That's my diagnosis of the problem, and I think I'm right.
Well, you expressed your opinion on the cryptocurrencies. That is answered. Practical question to the car mechanic. Having a small income, but I can save for investment about 1,500 euros a year. How to invest and where to invest when I have the feeling that if I put it to a bank, and they put it into stocks or shares, that's just a way to lose control.
Well, unfortunately, you can't make much money without giving up some control. The first thing you need to do is you need to make sure you have an emergency fund on hand of however much you need. And that might depend. If you've got kids, you probably need more of an emergency fund.
Which means emergency fund means there is a certain amount of money where you have which is safe and you have direct access to every day.
A pile of cash that you can access quickly, that you can't lose money on. Everybody needs that.
Okay, if you have that.
Once you've got that, the big thing you want to be able to work towards, I mean, the situation in the UK and Germany might be a bit different. In the UK, I advise save up to buy a house, but that's like phenomenally difficult. In the short term, it's probably best just to buy. I personally have a mixture of gold and global
physical gold, or
no, I buy.
shares?
I have it in
Mining shares.
No, I just buy. There's funds which just buy the gold.
Okay,
Yeah,
indices.
Just a fund.
Yeah.
Fund has gold and global stock trackers, global low fee stock trackers, a bit of gold, a bit of stock trackers. They tend to work quite nicely because when the economy is weak, the gold goes up, and when the economy is perceived to be strong, the stocks go up. But over time, a big part of my theory is that asset prices will increase significantly. So I would advise against holding for the long term large amounts of cash or bonds. I prefer to hold gold and stocks, but I have to caveat against that. Both of those things, especially gold, have gone up enormously in the last year. So if you do buy now, there's definitely risks of pullbacks, especially in the short term. And of course, these things can go down as well as up.
As a trader, do you have or did you have any experience with foundations, for example, like the ones financial foundations based in Liechtenstein or somewhere else?
No, I quit when I was quite early. I mean, these kind of like try and help you avoid your taxes kind of guys. I did have some guys pitching some crazy like, you know, get your tax back, take no risk schemes at me. But I was already like quite depressed by then and it kind of made me a bit sick. But people did approach me. Yeah, people did approach me, but, you know, I got out when I was like 25 or 26, so I didn't have any time to build any extremely complicated tax avoidance arrangements.
But that's what many of the foundations are, though from their official, from their official claim, they claim to be in kind of public value, not private value. But in fact, they're kind of hidden safe havens, right?
Yeah, I think always be careful of rich people claiming to give their money to charity. Very often they tend to give it to charities that they themselves own, which is a nice way to give money away.
Do we have a problem the way we teach economics? The guy who asked that said, I study economics myself, and I had the feeling the way the economic which we are taught is just avoiding access to reality. Is it true?
Yeah, I'm very, very critical of the way we teach economics, especially at the postgrad level. I think there's a extreme over obsession with mathematics, and that's, you know, my undergrad was maths and econ. I love maths. I'm good at maths. But if you're getting postgrads to do simultaneous equations or invert matrices, like, you've definitely fucked up. Like, these guys should be looking at real world economic problems. There should be more comparison of the models to real problems and working out why is this real problem not covered in this model. There's precious little of that for some reason. I would like to see, I think the best way to fix that is to really reward economists who make accurate predictions, especially unexpected accurate predictions, because that's how you find...
Any name you would drop now?
There's a few economists that I like. I mean, obviously, you've got Piketty and Gabriel Zucman and Emmanuel Saez who work beneath them. They're working on inequality. One economist who I think writes a lot of really accessible books for ordinary people is Ha-Joon Chang. He's a Korean economist based in the UK. There are a few guys who look at inequality. There's a couple of guys called Mian and Sufi. They work with the German guy called Ludwig Straub. They've been good, but those are the only guys that I know. But I'm sure there are other good guys out there.
That's quite an amount. There's a related question on that. You know the term homo economicus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the question was, isn't the assumption of a homo economicus a person which only acts in terms of economical terms and values, that can't be the reality of human beings and of behavior of individuals in society? Ain't that the assumption of the homo economicus a major reason for fundamental mistakes the economical theories based on that figure do?
So I actually, from what I look at macroeconomics, I don't think that creates a massive problem in macro, because I think that people en masse generally do tend to behave according to their motivations. I think it tells us a little bit more about the way economists view people and the way economists view themselves. And I think there's some kind of inbuilt ideas about selfishness, which I think economists believe, but are not actually true. I took a behavioral economics course at Oxford, and they seem to be obsessed with like perfecting the way humans make decisions. I think economists should be working at making people's lives better rather than trying to make people better. I don't think it's our job to say what a human should be. I think it's our job to make sure that that human can get a house and food and a little bit of leisure time and a family if they want one.
Provocation. Would the disappearing of the middle class really be a loss? And the example for this provocation was, let's imagine owners of small shops who have the right and possibility now to exploit their employees as there ain't enough labor protection rules. Would it really be a loss if these, let's call them modern slaveholders, disappear?
Well, you know, I live in the UK and obviously you're here in Germany. I don't know if you've spent much time in countries without a middle class, you know, in places like India or much of Latin America.
No, I didn't.
Placed in sub-Saharan Africa. If you don't have a middle class, you tend, first of all, it doesn't mean you don't have any inequality amongst the poor. You know, if you go back and read Charles Dickens, you have, you know, you still have slum landlords who are themselves impoverished, but they're slightly more impoverished than their tenants. No middle class means poverty. And it's bad for the poor as well, because if the middle class, they spend money and that drives up the wages of the poor. You lose that middle class and those wages fall as well. And, you know, I know we live in unequal societies and there's a lot of animosity often between the poor and the middle. And a big part of my work is how do we bring these two groups together? Because I think the way that our current situation persists is very often that the rich create this animosity between the middle and the poor. And if the middle and the poor don't unite, then the rich can kind of eat everybody. It's a kind of divide and conquer thing. The end result of no middle class tends to be broad poverty. And I think that's a bad thing.
A personal question. You won't have to answer it if you don't want to. What happened to the fortune you made as a trader? Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there. I mean, I did a lot of different investments and I did lose some money on some investments, but other investments made money. You know, I had an amount of money in my head that I figured that is enough money that you can leave and you can be free. Like you don't have to work. I wanted to be able to devote my time to this project, trying to do something about inequality. And I figured I had enough money that I could, basically I invested that money and I used the proceeds of that money to fund my life, which meant that I could do this inequality work, which until I wrote this book didn't pay me anything at all. But yeah, it's like, you know, I don't spend a lot of money. I don't do any crazy investments. So yeah, it's still there and it's growing and I make money trading and I made money from the book. So yeah, that's, you know, that's what pays for me to be here.
Okay. There was an observation from a female chatter who said, in Germany, residencies for the elderly very often are bought up by investors. And when these investments don't pay enough, they are just sold. And the elderly people, helpless in their age, find themselves in the street. Is it similar in the UK? And if so, what can be done against that?
I don't know, to be honest. It's obviously I'm not that old myself. My granddad lived in an elderly care home towards the end of his life. I think the situation that we have in the UK tends to be that it's very expensive. Elderly care is very expensive. So what that means is very often you have people who think that they're okay because they own their house and they've got their pot of money and their family's going to be okay. And almost all of that pot, if not all of that pot, ends up getting spent on end-of-life care. And that is actually a big part of the mechanism by which the middle class lose their wealth, actually.
Yes.
Is that they think
they have to
okay.
sell it.
Yeah. So I try to focus on letting people know, because you get a lot of people who own their own house and they're like, oh, I'm going to be fine because I own my own house. And they're not going to be fine because they're going to lose that when they're in their end of life care. But unfortunately, I don't know much specifically about homes being bought and sold.
Is it true that up to 75% of apartments in the city of London are more or less empty because the owners, they are owned by rich people who live all over the world and spend just a few days, a month or a year in London? Is it true?
I probably need to clarify exactly what is meant by the City of London, because obviously London is a city, but there is a very small area in the centre called the City of London, which is the finance region.
I don't know what
if they mean that area, which is a relatively small, very central part of London, which is where a lot of banks are, that wouldn't surprise me at all, because I've never met anyone who actually lives there. And the house prices are probably insane. And it's probably true in a lot of the very expensive parts of London. London as a whole, I'm sure it's certainly not true, but perhaps in that small area, yes.
Okay. Should there be a limit to wealth as proposed by Ingrid Robain's limitarism?
You know, I'm not against it in theory. I think we need to avoid people becoming extremely rich. There's a question of how do you deal with somebody like Jeff Bezos or somebody like Bill Gates that suddenly makes an enormous amount of money. I think a hard limit is probably a little bit of a blunt measure. There's probably better ways that we can get that money used positively for society.
Let me guess, by taxing?
Yeah, I mean, probably. Yeah, I think taxation would probably be better. But I mean, we definitely do need to limit the power of extremely wealthy individuals, because otherwise it becomes corrosive to politics, it becomes corrosive to the economy.
As we can see right now in the USA?
Yeah, but not just the USA. It's happening in the UK as well, and I'm sure it happens here. The USA has a specific problem because it's an enormous economy with extremely wealthy billionaires. But, to a lesser extent, I'm sure the same thing would be happening here.
Yeah. Well, Elon Musk is a role model for the top of that dynamic. Yeah. Right? That's a question from someone who identifies himself as a fan of yours.
Okay, thank you.
So, other plans to do things together with the UK musician Ren, who tells about the same topics as you do.
Man, a lot of people have mentioned this guy to me, and I've had a look at his videos, and he seems cool. The problem I've got is, like, this year, my stuff is, like, really blown up, and I get so many messages, and we don't really have like a funding stream to like fund a team around me. So it kind of ends up just being me getting like 1,000 messages a day. And I don't really have the time to reach out to people. I would be super interested in it theoretically. The problem is, like, I just don't have the people around me to like manage all of these like outreaches we could do. One day I would love to, and we're probably going to open a Patreon, see if we can get some staff, to see if we can have somebody to like work this stuff out. But at the moment, I don't really have the staff to manage this stuff.
Okay. Another somehow provocative question.
Yeah.
Morals aside, isn't pure capitalism the best system for achieving individual self-fulfillment?
I mean, what is pure capitalism, I think if you have a pure capitalist, I think without massive inequality, capitalism can work quite well. The problem with capitalism is, why doesn't capitalism provide, there's this guy, who Mr. Beast is? Mr. Beast, like world's biggest YouTuber. He goes and he buys like relatively cheap surgeries for like kids in Africa and fixes their eyesight for like 500 quid. Why doesn't capitalism fix blind people's eyesight for 500 quid? Because
it would limit or reduce their fortunes.
I would argue it's just simply because they don't have any money. Capitalism provides really good stuff for people with money, which is why it doesn't work that bad when you have an equal society, because then most people have money. But as you move towards a more unequal society, it basically structures the whole society around the needs and wants of the top like 1% or 5%. India is a capitalist society. Go to India and tell me it's working well.
is the real reason why the rich are against higher taxes not the fact that they understood very well that higher taxes and more public income would make it more difficult for them to stay in the position where they are? Is it, so let's say, the opposition against higher taxation kind of a self-defense?
Well, it is a self-defense. When I was writing the book, I was reading a book by Charles Dickens called Hard Times. And there's a section in there which I thought was quite interesting where he talks about how the factory owners in Britain at the time were saying that if the government raised 1 penny on their taxes, they'd throw their factories into the sea.
Yeah.
And it was so funny to hear, here's a guy 150 years ago, and the rich are saying the same things then that they're saying now. The rich don't want to pay more taxes because it's just, obviously, they don't want to pay more taxes. They love money and they want more money for themselves, and they're trying to protect, it's nice being rich. You can do whatever you want. You can go on holiday, you can have a nice big house, and they want to protect that.
Why shouldn't the state invest in stocks? Norway and the Netherlands do that. They put state money into stocks, massive investments, and they do well.
Yeah, it seems to have worked quite well for Norway. I think there are other countries as well that have these kind of sovereign wealth funds. Famously, the UK could have had one because they had a big oil boom, which they didn't choose to keep. To be honest, I think it's not a bad idea for governments to have wealth funds, but I'm talking to you as an English person who comes from a country where the welfare state is basically being shut down. We can barely even afford to keep the hospitals and the police running. So I think we probably need to fix that first.
3 last questions. Have you ever been called a nest polluter?
Nest polluter?
Yeah.
No, you're going to have to tell me what that is.
Yeah, that's a translation of a German term. It's like a bird which just pollutes or shits into the nest where it comes from.
Oh, because I talk against the finance system that paid me. Well, I've never been called a nest polluter specifically. I do see some people commenting online like, oh, this guy, he made so much money and now he talks against them. I think it's...
A class traitor would be...
I think it's... Well, but, what is my class? My sister can't pay the rent.
Yeah.
Is that my class?
Okay. You talked about success. What does success mean? Can't it be an achievement of success if you even step down and free yourself from a stressful life and find, let's call it, satisfaction in a quiet life without much physical property? Can't that be a definition of success?
Yeah, I think it could be. Definitely, I think it could be. I'm getting some good philosophical questions today. I think we live in a society, especially I come from a society which likes to laud financial, especially for men, like if you don't make money, you're a failure. Personally, I think if you build a life that you're happy with and it makes you satisfied, you don't need a lot of material possessions. At the same time, we should recognise that we're making it increasingly hard for people to have quite basic things like financial security, like being able to heat their homes and buy food for their kids. So we shouldn't look down on people who want more money, especially in the cases where they really need that money to get the basic necessities of life.
Are you familiar with the German writer, theater writer and the theater director Bertolt Brecht? He wrote the Three Penny Opera. That's one of his most famous works. Yeah. I'm asking that because there's a very famous quote from that opera, one of the worldwide, I guess, most famous quotes. And the English translation of that would be, what is a bank robbery in comparison to the founding of a bank?
Yeah, I'm not
You know
familiar with
that?
him. My flatmate mentioned this guy Preston. He's German.
But you get the idea of that comparison, saying, okay, a bank robbery is stealing people's money,
Yeah.
which is deposited in the bank. But what is this in comparison to founding a bank where you can get part of a share of people's money every day?
Well, this is kind of the story of the book in a sense. You know, I've described what I did in the bank in some senses as a bank robbery, even though I was working for the bank. There's a scene at the end of the book where the traders in the bank discuss who won, Gary or CitiBank. And one of the traders says, Gary won. And then everybody cracks up laughing. And I think this I found this interesting because it raises questions. What is a bank and what is a banker? Most of the traders who work for CitiBank, they fucking hate CitiBank, you know. So what really is CitiBank if everyone in it hates it?
Well, they pay.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that raises sort of questions about, bigger question about the society we live in. Like, is it really working for the people in it? What is a good economy? You know, we're told the economy is strong and yet people can't feed their kids. I think what really matters is the people in the space and that we give them a good life, I would say.
Gary, thank you. What are you going to tell your girlfriend about this talk you had in a Berlin studio?
Oh, I don't have a girlfriend at the moment. What would I tell if I did have
sorry
one?
for that.
Yeah.
So what would you tell your best friend about the conversation you had today?
I'd say it was quite long and I needed to go to the bathroom for a period of it.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I would say, you know, I'm living with a German guy at the moment and I think it's easy for us to sort of... I think people like to look at other countries and say they're different from us, they're different from us. The more time I spend talking to people from different countries, the more I see we're having the same problems everywhere. Everybody kind of lives either in a place where you can't buy a house or where you can't get a job. And that seems to be true everywhere. And I think we need to be able to build across these international barriers because I don't think this is something that the UK is going to fix by itself or Germany is going to fix by itself. Inequality is making life harder for everyone. And I think I would say it just showed me that we're all dealing with the same problems and we need to be able to build together and work together.
When you started your answer, a late question came in. Will the election of Trump, if it happens, be good for the traders and the rich?
The traders and the rich tend to do well whatever happens. Obviously, last time Trump was in power, he did do significant tax cuts for the rich. He is himself a billionaire. One imagines he will cut taxes for the rich, and that probably will be good for traders and the rich. But the truth is, even if Kamala Harris wins, she's not going to deal with inequality. You know, and that's not. I'm not saying that because I dislike Kamala Harris or because I like Trump. You know, we've just had Labour win in the UK. You know, I know you've got your centre-left power party here in Germany. None of them are dealing with inequality. So I try and avoid really getting sucked into this, this tennis match of political politics. You know, I'm a single issue guy. Deal with inequality. Whether it's Trump, whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's the SPD or the CDU, is it? You need to deal with this. You need to deal with this. And I don't want us to get factional and divided. Even if you are a Trump supporter, you'll be affected by growing inequality. You know, even if you're an AfD supporter, you'll be affected by growing inequality. This is what jeopardizes your kids' financial future. And that will happen whoever wins.
Gary, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your answers, your time. Und danke für eure Fragen, eure Unterstützung, ohne die es dieses Format nicht gäbe. Wer im vergangenen Monat dabei war, jetzt im Abspann. Und wir sehen uns hoffentlich bald wieder. For those who prefer the credits in English, thanks for your questions, thanks for your interest, thanks for your support, without which this format wouldn't exist, as you know that. Those ones who supported the channel in the last month will be seen in the credits at the end right now. Goodbye, see you soon.